minutes each, so do the math.
I got a couple.
Highlighter in there.
You're gonna gain a nickname, Tab.
Yeah, Tab.
He's trying to overcome his other one, clipboard.
Yeah, we do that on a Sunday, don't we?
Can I add a couple too, Dave? Would that be all right?
Good.
Welcome, everybody, to our Municipal Building Authority of Morgan City. Like to approve of the meeting's agenda. Anybody has any changes or anything to the one item?
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay. Adoption of a tentative budget for the Municipal Building Authority of Morgan City for the 20. We have to have a vote? We do?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passed. Adoption of a tentative budget for the Municipal Building Authority of Morgan City for the 2022-2023 fiscal year and set date for final approval. Resolution M-2216. Has anybody had a chance to look at this?
Yes.
Let's discuss.
Not a lot, just the, on the resolution, item number 1, about halfway down. Should probably read the members of the City Redevelopment Agency, the MBA. And I would just, a question for Ty, just the, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. I think I know the answer, but just the source of the revenue. It's external and internal, just which was which.
Yeah, so that top one right there is the external, which is basically to other,
Downstairs.
yep,
Okay.
two entities, and the other one is just really rough tentative. So I have a lot of work to do on the tentative budget. I just, on the tentative side, I just plugged a guesstimate in each one and added it up for this, just to show that the fund would function. But I haven't gone through and figured out percentages of departments. Total amount of space. And I also haven't figured out shop space versus office space. So up to this point, I've spent all my time on the amended budget because we had so many.
Yeah, there's hence more stickers.
Yeah, unanticipated. And so
More tabs.
all this does is basically open the door, say we have an idea of what the tentative budget, and the expenses really don't have anything identified at this point.
Okay.
So the idea there is.
Right, we're gonna
we won't be
spend what
spending
we-
anyway, we'll just start the fund. And then as we need building improvements, we'll have a better idea of what those
So-
go towards.
But there aren't any major improvements you foresee now,
Mhm.
like a roof that's
All
leaking
the
and
expenses that we normally have,
Yeah.
we're just funneling them.
Yeah,
through.
the caveat to that is once the train depot is occupiable, we just don't know how far the grant's gonna take that project. And so we'll transfer ownership to the Municipal Building Authority, and that's something else that the accountant will help us with is that transfer of assets, because it's all on the books. But there's a potential in order to get a tenant in the building, we'll have to spend some additional money. I just don't know what that is yet. With the design build, you know.
Ty, do we need to establish the authority?
No, so the building authority's been in existence for, Denise has kept the,
Kept paying the
yeah,
renewal, and I think it's since like 1990.
So was it active at one time?
Yeah. Well, no,
No.
most entities have one, you establish one, right? So it's its own business basically, and
Own entity.
yeah, and our own entity. And so when I met with our accountant to tell him, here's my next way I want to disrupt everything in the city. Do we do an internal service fund or municipal building authority? And then he said, well, you have a municipal building
Have it in
authority.
place. Okay.
And it could go either way, but he said, based on our intents, it sounds like it's better just to start right out of the gate with the municipal building authority. You know, so then later if you add, you know, like a rec center or, you know, other places that need to bond, you know, or that sort of thing, then you would just run it through the ownership of the building authority. So this is just it's always existed. We haven't had the annual meeting
Right.
technically, but now that there's,
Budget either.
yeah, now that there's budget, that'll just automatically happen, that we at least have an annual budget meeting. And then we'll just keep it intact and go from there.
Good.
I think we created it to build the city hall. That's what we
Oh, was
did.
it
Oh, there you go.
2002?
Yeah.
Is that when it was?
It's, Whenever we started.
Yeah,
construction.
probably.
Makes sense.
Do we need to amend the bylaws or anything? I mean, I can change the board members when I renew.
It's still a council.
Yeah.
The structure's the same.
Structure's the same, but you do, every year you elect. Well, you just reaffirm the board if you're gonna have the same board members, or if you got new council members, you put them on.
Timing on that, Gary, is that after the new year, before the new year?
Usually
The
about-
fiscal year?
About the same time you renew the RDA.
Yeah, and
The RDA board
That's what it
is-
is.
it's earlier in the year, right? Like January, February.
In the calendar year, mid fiscal year.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, on the establishment, but then our transition, we're shooting for July 1 because it'll start in a new budget year.
Right.
That's where the.
Yeah, fiscal. Okay.
Dave asked my question. It was on the internal and external. So right now, external, we'd have what? Looking ahead, we'd have the basement, we'd have the train depot.
Yeah, and so the budget reflects just the basement.
Okay, but the train depot would
Could
eventually,
be
could
another external.
potentially,
Mhm.
that would be right now about it, right?
Yeah, but you know, we've never done that before, so technically there's the building at the park at the ball field. So not just the ball field, but we own that.
The little league baseball, and the announcer stand. and-
Yep.
Yeah, that's
So,
right, we do.
but
Are the Boweries included in that, or that's just?
no, we do that under park,
That's
so that's just
parks,
part reservations. What I'm saying is that's actual like facility that it's not being maintained very well. We've never had any, you know, funds identified because we've just said, well, that all just belongs to the recreation. I don't know what we called it before, but they use it, right? They store their stuff in there. But depending on how the rest of that goes in the county, I'm just saying that's a potential probably future. Hey, if you want to occupy this space, then you just have to do a lease agreement with the city. Because I'm sure the school's probably thinking along the same lines with all of their
Finally get
facilities.
Figured out what they want to do with the recreation.
Yeah, once they figure it out. But it doesn't make any sense for the school and the city to own facilities, buildings, you know, and property and not have some sort of an agreement
I agree.
with that entity on how that's going to operate. You just don't.
I've always felt that was kind of crazy that.
Yeah,
the
well,
school
well-
didn't charge any lease for their facilities that the recreation departments used over the last.
yeah, that's, but the other side of that though is because we had a voice or a seat at the table on that board or committee, it gave me a little bit better feeling about the way that it is now, where it just use it and do what you want without us having any part of that board. So I think we just go the other way where we just prepare ourselves to say, okay, let's do some agreements here, nothing terrible, but just clean it up and keep it separate and lease the space that you're using.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
It helps with liability too, right? Like we can't just say, oh, you know, we own the building and are you covered under our insurance or your insurance? And then we say, oh, well, something just happened and we don't have an agreement.
If they just use it for storage.
Yeah. Or maybe we use it for something in the future. So
Your office?
sure, it has a upper level view.
Upstairs view.
The executive suite.
Still have a snow cone machine in there or something.
It won't be any hotter than my office here, so.
Executive suite.
So let me get that through my head. So the ballpark building. So if that turns into a little league again, they would lease that during the time, or how does that work?
When WBBA was hot and heavy, and that place got used a lot.
Yeah,
As I recall, I could be wrong here, but I think WBBA, I think a bunch of the parents actually built. I don't know if the city actually paid for the building of that building or not. I don't think they did, but I think they turned it over to the city as well.
I think we own it, yeah.
But I think a lot of it was built on donations. But when WBBA was going and they played baseball, Little League baseball there quite a bit, I don't think the city ever did charge them a fee to use that field. Not that I'm aware of it.
No, we don't. I think that's the point, is that before there was an agreement or a board, right, that said, here, you do the dirt, we'll do the grass,
Yeah.
you set up the field, you keep the equipment, all of that stuff was figured out. Now that feels like it's kind of not within our,
We mowed the lawn. The city, I think, mowed the lawn back in the day, but
we still do. Yeah.
like the infield and all that, maintenance of the infield was typically
Yeah.
coaches or Stan Reese did a ton of work over there, you know.
constantly over there.
Yeah, so,
But if somebody goes and uses the Bowery, it's a fee.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thinking the same thing.
Yeah,
be
so-
appropriate to
so
have a fee for it.
if a rec league ever started again, there would be a fee associated with that part of the facility,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah, and just a lease agreement. Just,
Well, and if there were concessions, some of that could go our way for maintenance.
And there was concessions back in the day.
Concessions out of it.
I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to WBBA. I'm not sure what.
Wasn't, oh, when they was over there towards the end, Tony, the city decided they had to be insured or something.
I just remember,
Stan Reese a part of that?
Big Stan did a
yeah.
ton of work over it. What was her name that was on the council? Help me.
Yeah, the good lady lives over at Fox Point.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, what was her name? She dove into it quite extensively, and she came up with, remember, she was constantly talking about how we had to do this and we had to do that to get it upgraded so it could be, insured against any liability if somebody was hurt over there, that sort of thing. And I'm not sure where that ever ended up,
Well,
but
I think we told them they had to, I think it ended up, we told them they had to be insured or something. In order or something like that, kind of.
and there were some improvements we needed to make in order to, they gave you a laundry list.
WBBA played games during the year to lead up to an all-star team. Watch out, there were fireworks on that.
Was there?
Yeah, my boy didn't make it and yours did.
That never goes on.
Yeah, small town.
So
I went to
other-
California a couple of times back in the day.
Yeah.
the only other part to this municipal building authority is for property. So, if we have a fund and we have an opportunity to get property that, if land banking is the right term or whatever, but it can.
So you deed property into the,
Mhm,
so this building here will be
mhm.
quitclaim deeded to
I'll just-
Development Authority.
Just, it's all the same entity, it just gets transferred on the books, so all of
Okay,
the,
so we don't change with the county recorder.
no, it'll still be listed as the city, but,
Morgan City.
internally, that's where the assets and the liabilities exist is on that.
Shelley Betts finally came to me.
Oh, okay, I remember her. Any more discussion? Everybody okay? Let's move on to the RDA meeting. We need the motion to close this.
What's the
Meeting?
what's the date you want?
June 28th.
June 28th.
Yeah, let me get to that.
Let's do it right there.
Mayor, I will make a motion that we approve of the tentative budget for the Municipal Building Authority of Morgan City and set a date certain of June 28th. I don't need a time, do I?
5:30.
5:30, okay. That would be PM.
Yeah.
For a second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. We'll adjourn the RDA meeting and
In
was that, oh, that was the MBA, sorry. MBA meeting and we'd like to welcome everybody to the RDA meeting.
You need
Sorry,
a little
we're
more
late.
alphabet. Yes.
That's right. Like to welcome everybody here. Do we have any changes or approvals in the meeting's agenda?
I'll move to accept the meeting's agenda for May 10th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
I will make a motion as well that we approve the minutes of the Morgan City Redevelopment Agency meeting on February 8th, 2022.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks, Tony.
Couple of follow-up items, but could be in our next meeting, or if we have time here, just on the HB 151, wonder where that went, and the fourth class county. It looked like we were thrown in there with the county rather than our own.
Yeah, so,
And if we don't have time, that's fine.
so
Where are you looking?
Just in the minutes from
Oh, okay.
our last meeting.
did you already approve the minutes?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just,
I
this
just
is
don't
a
wanna-
follow-up. not
I just
a-
don't want to
not a-
comment. I
Yeah, not a
just want to make
change.
sure we were done with that part.
We're done.
Yeah, no, we're good with the minutes. just a
Okay.
follow-up.
These minutes are this agenda and the minutes of February 28th. It's been approved.
So anyway, we were included in that exemption.
Okay,
So the House bill passed, but we were included. So the way they do the class, it's countywide, regardless of on ours, we're fourth, because it's based on county population.
so the fourth was excluded from the, or
Yep.
did have an exemption from the ability to do incentives. Okay.
So that's exactly what we were.
Seemed like at one time you were talking about the city being the entity and that you had carved out Morgan City to not have to be part of it.
Well, yeah, and it was that. It was because of the county is a fourth class county.
Okay, and we got down to the fourth
Yeah,
class.
and the bill
We're up
exempted
to-
fifth and sixth, but
Okay.
not fourth. And so we fought for us being, exempt from that
Okay.
legislative bill, which we were included. The bill passed, but it exempted fourth class, fifth and sixth.
Okay,
So
so we're good there.
we're good.
Yeah, and then you mentioned the elimination of single-family zone and allow multifamily housing everywhere. Where did that go?
Single family zone?
That was part of the House bill.
Yeah, was that a different one?
Yeah, it didn't.
It didn't pass, okay. So, I mean, that
262 passed and it
it
was,
seemed odd on one hand that we'd eliminate single-family and allow multi everywhere, and then turn around and it says the big issue was leaving land use decisions up to local governments. Well, not if you're telling us that everything has to be multifamily.
except for the ones they say.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we'll have a lot more discussion on that here in another week.
Yeah, and that was my point, is during the legislative session, they kept doing that and then saying, well, we don't want to be California. Right? So it's like, or Oregon, or where they control land use at the state level.
Regional planning through the state.
So how many other cities did that help, Ty, on that fourth class?
All the rural stuff probably.
You kind of
Us and San Juan.
the champion of that, were you there for a while?
Yeah, but to be honest, I was very self-centered on that. Didn't really care who else it helped.
No, I was just curious if it helped.
Only two counties that
No, I'm just, so there was a couple of So Blanding City was in our same situation, and all of San Juan County relies heavily on economic development incentives because there's, they struggle, you know what I mean? It's, I think, because they have tourism, that all their problems are solved, and retail's a real struggle down there. So, with the same population. So anyway, I just know that the city manager in Blanding and I felt the same. And then there was probably some others that benefited, but I didn't really talk to anybody specifically.
And I like the wording on the big issue was leaving land use decisions up to local governments,
I mean, that
not the
was
state.
Yeah, that's what we're,
That's huge.
and the league's on board with that concept. That's what they fight every
All
session.
Finally came out with a pretty good compromise. Just to the stationary plan concept. I'm excited about sometime, but it escaped the proposition that all decisions, land use decisions, would be reviewed and gone through by the ombudsman's office.
Really?
So,
And that is of any municipality.
enemies.
Yeah.
Why don't, again, why don't they just do it for us? Why have the city? They know more.
For multifamily projects without
Yeah,
being beat up on.
yeah.
So that's.
They know
that's
more
the
than we
loss.
do. They know what's best.
Okay. Let's move on to item 3. Adoption of a tentative budget for the city, Morgan City Redevelopment Agency for 22-23 fiscal year and set date for final approval. Resolution R 2217. Are there any discussions on this?
I just had one question. The 2022 original budget and the 2022 amended budget are the same. Why are we amending it if they're the same?
It's just all part of the same process. It didn't, technically, we didn't need to, but the other problem with that is we still haven't received our payments yet. So if you look at the actual year to date on the
Right.
2022, we've only received 32 of the 225. So I think my intention was to get the actual in there, and then I would have the actuals on what we paid each entity, but because I haven't received any of the actuals, I don't know what the,
But you'd expect to receive them in 60 days, I guess.
well, and we're just,
45 days.
hope so,
Okay.
but it, you know, there's really no change. And then this, I guess, before the next one's based on the concept that we have the same revenue, but the entities agreed to that new amount that I've been proposing. I've been to the school district and they were in favor. I just haven't been to the county yet to see if they're on board. And so on the tentative, if you can see, that just increases the grants by 40, almost 40,000. To do one more project per year.
And then payments to the general fund, Morgan County School District, those are made by us, so those will happen by the end of
Yeah.
the year.
Yeah, we need to have them happen before the end of our budget year for sure. Mhm.
Yeah, by June. That's all I had.
I do have an appointment to go visit, and see what's going on, but
That's good. You've got the school board on our. Okay.
yeah, they were very complimentary and where if you remember, it looks like they're gonna accept less revenue, but they're also gonna receive the revenue from the CDA this year. So it's a net, almost a net zero proposition for them. And so they'd rather see us help another, capital improvement project.
Mayor. Make a motion that we adopt the tentative budget for the Morgan City Redevelopment Agency for 2022-2023 fiscal year and set same date. So June 20, with a date certain of June 28th at 5:45.
I'll second that, Mayor.
State this, right?
Actually,
Tony's given us a motion to resolution adopting a tentative budget for the Morgan City Redevelopment Agency for the fiscal year beginning June 1st, 2022 and ending June 30th, 2023, and setting the date June 28th, 2022 at 5:45 to hear interested persons prior to adopting a final budget.
should I have mentioned that's resolution R 22-17?
I think so.
Okay, I'll add that to my motion.
Still second
Revised
that.
motion.
Sure.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We got number,
Tabs. The tabs are running lower.
I got rid of.
Yeah. Seeing less pink.
and I think we need to have a motion to adjourn. We can just adjourn on this one. Okay,
There you go.
You have the gavel.
I like that one.
As long as you got the gavel, you're in charge.
Does anybody need a 2-minute drink break before we start our other
Cookies out there.
cookies out there? Yeah,
I'll bring the cookies in while you get started.
okay.
Bring some ice cold milk with it. Some cookies and
We have to go all the way to Ridley, so. You don't need me in the work section.
don't go over to Ridley for eggs.
Yeah.
None around. Got a couple minutes.
Have to go start raising your own chickens, Jeffrey. Masters of Business Administration meeting. MBA.
So many acronyms, so little.
Oh, man, that's the hardest thing to learn.
What was CDA he mentioned a minute ago? CDA, Community Development Area.
Which used to be RDAs
But now it's city,
and EDAs and
Economic Development.
CDAs. So,
So it's consulted now?
yeah, it's all, it's one development area is what is it called? It's CDA, but I can't remember what the first development area. Everything is one.
We're gonna have to have city council with subtitles so we can keep up on all the acronyms, you know.
Spell it
I
out.
still call it RDA.
Yeah.
So just,
I was looking,
MCC?
I'm old.
I was looking through the water agreement.
Chuck will have an RDA.
Hey, you're all right.
We'll just keep running under that.
Yeah.
Understanding.
Blame Dave.
No, you better get that back.
We need to change Morgan City to the building.
Why'd he put it right here, Jeffrey? It took me a half an hour reading today to figure out what AAA was in the water agreement. What is it, Gary? AAA, the Appraisers Association of America, or the,
American Arbitration Association.
oh, there we go.
All added to. That's why we're a happy city, right?
I was sitting there today.
We always win
reading
the
through
best
that, going,
water in the
what is
state.
AAA?
Yeah, I hear you.
Who's am I drinking here, Ty? Is this gonna be yours? I mean, no, like Dave said, what employee's gonna say, who drank my chocolate milk last night?
Oh, no, it was mine. It was mine to give.
Okay. Welcome to the,
I better have a cookie.
did you get the right cookie
I better have a cookie.
before we start?
This macadamia. Thank you.
Yeah, hey, he said it right there.
Okay. Welcome to the Morgan City Council Work Meeting. All of those that are on Zoom, welcome. We have a motion to We don't need a motion on this one. This is a work meeting. Okay, number one item is discussion of the power rate study. David Berg's on, we see your face there. Can you hear us?
You all hear me?
Yeah.
All right, I'm in my daughter and son-in-law's unfinished basement, if you're wondering about the HVAC behind me. So my wife and I are here babysitting grandchildren this evening, so.
You're probably happy that you're at this meeting then, aren't you?
I'm always happy to be at a meeting to talk about rates.
Okay. We're at your mercy right here.
Okay, so the purpose of the meeting tonight is basically to explain to you where we're at. What we've done is we've looked at the results for the utility if you don't change rates. And we've also done what's called a cost of service analysis. And if you were given what I call the interim report, the information that I'll be talking about, and I'm going to share a screen with you. But the information I'm going to be talking about is also included in that report. And essentially, this is just to let you know where things are at prior to then moving forward with rate design, so that you'll have a sense of the direction that we're headed as we start thinking about rate design. So I'm going to do, all right, it says the host has disabled participant screen sharing. So there's somebody who can allow me to share a screen.
Should have just happened, Dave. I think you're good to go.
All right, good to go, it looks like, yes. Okay, so can you see a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
All right, well, without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and dive into this. And if anywhere along the way you've got questions for me, please just interrupt and we'll handle those as we go, all right? So I call this the interim report because obviously there's not recommendations around rate design as yet. And so the things that we're going to be talking about, let me just go ahead and put those up here. So one of the first things we do is we take a look at a projection forward of operating results under the assumption that your existing rates stay in effect. Essentially what this helps us do is figure out if we need more money, because we see how, from a financial operating perspective, how the rates hold up. We're also going to talk a little bit about reserve levels as well, because really for municipal utilities, when you look at how they're performing financially, how their reserves hold out is really important. I've worked with utilities before with negative operating results, but they don't need rate increases because their reserves hold and they're just fine. And I've worked with utilities with pretty strong operating results who still need an increase because their reserves are depleting, usually because of debt service and capital improvements. So we're also going to look at cost of service, which is looking at the fairness, if you will, between different rate classes. So like, for instance, the residential class, you get a certain amount of revenue from them. How does that revenue match up with what's called the allocated cost to serve? We're also going to be looking at some rate design issues. We'll talk about a purchase power adjustment clause, which I'll explain that more when we get there. And then basically, we'll talk a little bit about kind of rate design guidance. So this is the operating results under the assumption that existing rates stay in effect through fiscal 2026. And when you look at the bottom line, you can see that essentially, for this year, which ends in a month and a half, we're looking at negative 300,000, and that just continues to grow up to over $600,000 negative change in net position by the end of the study period. So when you look at these numbers, there's certainly an indication there that we're probably expecting to need some kind of a rate increase. And also then when we look at our cash reserves, you're starting out with about $1.6 million, which is good cash reserves. In fact, when you've got operating revenues of about 2.1 million, cash reserves of 1.6 million as a percentage of revenue is a really strong level of cash reserves. But then what happens is, we've got these negative operating results, which obviously impact cash. We add back in the depreciation expense because that's an operating expense in the operating results, but it's a non-cash. You don't write a check to anybody for depreciation. You're also getting the electric department gets a principal payment from the water department. But then we've got, fairly significant capital improvements. So when you look at the loss of change in net position and you look at the capital improvements, those negative numbers far exceed, that principal payment from the water and the depreciation funded. So essentially our 1.6 million goes down to about negative $750,000. So when we look at both the operating results as well as what happens with cash reserves, there's certainly an indication there of we're going to be, requiring a rate increase.
So Dave, on that,
I've got a question too. Go ahead.
Dave, on that first table, the projected operating results,
Yep.
is the revenue and the less operating expenses, is that just a percentage you have there?
This percentage basically is that the loss here of 314,000 is 14.9% of operating revenues.
Oh, okay.
So this is an indication that if you wanted to get to zero, operating revenues would have to be 14.9% higher.
So I think you mentioned, Dave, in the report that on the operating revenue, you've increased that at a little over 4% a year. Have you done the same for the expenses? Is it a?
Well, what we've done, okay, so the operating revenues only grow because of growth in sales. All right, there's no escalation in the rates, if you will, in this. So these, and you'll notice that the revenues are only going up by about 50,000 a year. That's because of more sales. It's not because of a change in rates. But your operating expenses, now we've got, and we've assumed a 4% annual increase in the cost of wholesale power. I think that's the number that you're referring to, which obviously is part of the operating expenses, and it's a significant part of your operating expenses. But then we've also escalated your internal operating expenses as well. So that's why you can basically see that with increased sales, we're going up by about 50,000 a year in revenues, but our operating expenses are going up by about 130,000 a year.
Well, and I think it's important to note too, that that's a constant value. That's not, I mean, nobody knows what the future is going to bring, but in 4 or 5 years, we may have some unexpected increases in expenses that we weren't anticipating. Hence the reason for your reserve.
That's exactly right. And that's why, going to the next slide again, the strong reserves you have now are a benefit that you really can't afford to allow this degradation of that reserve, because that, having reserves is sort of your internal insurance policy for short-term things that may happen that allows you to cover those things while you then recover through rates.
Right. And that answers my question. Those insurance provisions haven't been calculated into your cost of operating projection.
Correct. Because they're unknown, we can't put them in.
Right. We don't know.
That's the reason for having reserves to a certain extent for some of the unknowns.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I just have a comment. This is Ty. Even though it's a really good percentage, the 1.6 of revenue, it's not a large dollar amount in terms of what could go wrong on a power system. For example, just this year, if you remember, the Rocky Mountain Power tried to charge us $750,000 just for that connection that we had, at a joint substation. And so that doesn't even improve our system. That was just one of those
Yeah, variable you didn't know about.
Yeah, so we do, I mean, not that it's adequate. I'm not complaining about 1.6, but because we're such a small system, it doesn't take long for a, that reserve to get eaten up in a unforeseen issue. Yeah.
Well, that's a good point because I've worked with smaller utilities before that have reserves that exceed 100% of operating revenue. And I've worked with really large utilities who have maybe 25% of operating revenue, and it's sufficient for them. So, so that's a good point to make, is that kind of the smaller the utility, the higher as a percentage of your reserves, of your revenues that you really need in reserves, because those single events can be a much bigger deal for someone your size, as opposed to, let's say, a Provo or a Spanish Fork or a Lehigh. In fact, I've done work for Levan, for those of you who know it, and they're really small. They think you're a big utility. And so, they're a whole nother issue there. Plus, they've got the additional issue of 3 really large customers that are a huge amount of their revenue. So, there's no good absolute rule of thumb on reserves because of a lot of different variables that, with regard to different utilities. Now, I got 3 tables to talk about cost of service. So I've broken it down into basically 4 groups. You've got your residential, and you've got your commercial non-demand group, your small commercial demand, and your large commercial demand. So what this compares is through what's called the cost of service analysis, the different, what we call revenue requirements, but really, or expenses, if you will, of the utility are allocated in different ways to the different classes. And then we can compare them to the revenues that we collect from those classes. And so, here, when you look at this, it's kind of hard because when you're making these dollar comparisons. So on the next table, here what I show is that basically turn those dollar amounts into percentages. So the residential class is about 57% of the cost to serve, and you're getting about 56% of your revenues. In cost of service world, that's a 2% difference, and that's pretty darn good. Cost of service analysis is not an exact science, and you make a couple of little different assumptions and these numbers can change. So to a certain extent, both your 2 smaller groups, the residential and then the small commercial, essentially, there's a pretty good match between their allocated cost and their revenues, so that there's really no adjustment needed in their rates from the perspective of fairness relative to other classes. There's a little bit different issue relative to everybody needing more revenue. However, your small commercial demand, their revenues are about 16% lower than their cost. And then your large commercial, they're about 10%, the revenues higher than the cost to serve. So essentially, there's a bit of a subsidy going here from your large commercial to your small commercial demand customers. And so what will likely happen when we get into rate design is that we will address that to a certain extent. And there's some peculiar elements of your rate design that I'm going to talk about in a moment that have an impact on that. And then here's just showing it on sort of a dollars per kilowatt hour basis. It basically shows that those large commercial on a fairness basis are paying about a penny more than they should. Those small commercial demand are paying about 1.4 cents per kilowatt hour less than they should. Now we never fix those things in one fell swoop, but as we look over time in the recommendation, we'll probably be addressing that to a certain extent to try to even that out a little bit. But again, both the residential and commercial small demand are in really good shape relative to cost of service. So here's some bill comparisons just to show how you kind of compare to Rocky Mountain. So the first three are residential. And you can see that both for a 400 kilowatt hour, which is a relatively small, and 1,000, which is probably a little bit higher than average. You know, and Rocky Mountain has got summer and winter rates, and you're about 10% under their winter rate on the small residential and about 20% under their summer rate. And then, you know, kind of about the same thing here at the 1,000. But then on the 2,000 kilowatt hour customers, you're getting a little bit closer to Rocky Mountain. Part of that issue is because you don't have a customer charge, and Rocky Mountain Power has a $10 residential customer charge. So for a small customer, when that, you know, if you had a $10 customer charge, all of a sudden their bill might, the energy charge might be slightly lower, but their bill might jump up to like 45 or 46 bucks. But if you had a $10 customer charge on this big one, their bill might actually go down a little if you put in a customer charge and reduce the energy. So some of the comparisons on the residential is because of what's going on with your specific residential rate design. The commercial non-demand, you're well below Rocky Mountain Power. And quite frankly, that's because Rocky Mountain Power treats these kinds of customers very poorly because they have a $50 customer charge. And some of these customers are no bigger than a residential. And so in my view, the Rocky Mountain Power rate is kind of really unfair to folks like that. Now, the small commercial, which is the ones who are underpaying, notice that they're well under Rocky Mountain Power's rates, whereas the large commercial, which based on cost of service are the ones that are a bit overpaying, their bill is right in between the Rocky Mountain Power winter and summer. So you're kind of the comparison with Rocky Mountain Power also mirrors to a certain extent what cost of service showed us relative to kind of the fairness of the small commercial versus the large commercial rates. Now, looking at your rates, there's quite a few. There's a few things kind of to mention here. One is, so you've got what's called an inclining block rate, which there's no issue with that. You know, and that's another reason, if we go back up, why the 2,000 kilowatt hour customers bill goes up quite a bit, because they've got a lot more energy at this 12-cent rate. But the peculiar thing is that you have no customer charges. And I understand that you used to have a $5 residential customer charge, and that at some time in the past, it was reduced to 0 in conjunction with, I think, increasing some water rates or something. I've worked for a lot of utilities, and I've encountered 3 utilities with 0 residential customer charges. And interestingly enough, 2 of them are you and Lehigh. And I spoke to the Lehigh City Council last week. And, you know, we're talking about, you know, in Lehigh, we're talking about over a period of time, increasing those customer charges from, you know, 0 up to, goal is to get to $10 by 2026. But certainly within my recommendations, and because we need additional revenue, that well, actually the residential and the city commercial demand, whose rates are the same as residential, we're going to be looking at more of the rate increase for these folks needing to come from some addition of a customer charge. I think we'll want to do it, you know, phased in over time. But in that regard, for rate design with the residential is really, and the small commercial, is the need for having some kind of a customer charge there.
So Dave, where we don't have one, just explain the purpose of a customer charge.
Yes, good question. So when you connect a customer to the system, even if they use 0 energy, you still have to put in a transformer, you still have to put in a service drop, you still have to put in a meter install, You still have to read the meter. You still have to bill them. You have a customer service infrastructure in place, to deal with customers. So there's a certain amount of fixed cost associated with just having a customer on the system. And, typically that's, depending on the utility, that can be anywhere from like $10 to $20 a month as sort of a fixed cost associated with it. And so from a cost of service perspective, that's why most utilities have a customer charge, and like I said, it's $10 for Rocky Mountain. Actually, Spanish Forks is over $20, but Brigham is at like $4.50. But I also talked with their council last week, and we're looking at getting them up to $10 as well. So, but over a period of time, again, but 99% of utilities in this country have customer charges for residential customers.
I looked at my own personal power bill today, and I was reading through your proposal here. And my last power bill, if we threw a $5 customer service charge in, for me personally, that's a 15% increase over what I'm currently paying. So I thought, well, that's, percentage wise, that's a fairly steep increase. But I suppose if my thought was that we did introduce it, maybe bit by bit, rather than just let build it up over time.
Well, and that's all that, and your point is well taken, and that's why oftentimes in my 38 years of doing this, why there is a reluctance to raise customer charges, no matter what your starting point is, because of what happens with that percentage. If your bill is only $20 and then you add a $5 customer charge, that's a 25% increase.
Mine was 35.
Horrible. You tell somebody it's $5 and they might have one view. You tell somebody it's 25%, and that's a really, really big number. And so I think we have to appreciate those percentages, but we also sometimes have to keep them in perspective. And it's not that I'm saying we should jump right to 5, but that we need to get to some goal at some point, over time. Because the longer you ignore it, the further behind you get, which then makes it harder to fix. And, it just sort of becomes a spiral. Keep in mind that when you went from $5 to 0, you got a, 15% benefit.
Yeah, you don't talk yet.
Now, for your small commercial, and then also for your large commercial, the rate structures are very similar, but there's an interesting wrinkle that is lending itself to the fact about the cost of service issue. Now, for small commercials, they've got this first energy rate that's for the first 3,000 is 9 cents. And then everything over 3,000 is 5 cents. Now, to a certain extent, that does make sense, because once they exceed 10 kW, they also have a demand charge. And for most customers, that movement to 3,000 kilowatt hours is going to be in the neighborhood of 3,000 kilowatt hours of usage. So what they're really moving then is from an energy only rate of 9 cents to a demand and energy rate, which is $8.05. And that's not too bad a rate. And so, but again, no customer charge as well for these folks. And because a lot of these folks are smaller, just like with residential and the real small commercial, the fact that there's no customer charge keeps their bill considerably lower. Now, keep in mind for these folks, again, it's 0 to 3,000, and then it's in excess of 10 kW. Now, when we move to the large commercial, the rates over here are kind of the same, but that 9 cents is from 0 to 10,000 kilowatt hours. And the demand charge is still at over 10. So what's happening with these folks is a lot of their energy between 3,000 and 7,000 kilowatt hours, they're paying the demand charge plus the higher energy charge. And that's part of the reason why they're overpaying, because they got a block of energy in there where they're probably paying like 15 cents a kilowatt hour for, anywhere from 5 to 7,000 kilowatt hours. And so the peculiarities of the rate design is lending itself to their overpayment, because, and also, you notice these folks are all at 5 cents with the $8 demand charge. These folks are at 5.5 cents with the $8 demand charge. So even though the utilization of energy on a ratio of energy demand could be the same for one of these customers as it is for one of these customers, these folks are paying more per kilowatt hour simply because of the way the rate design is done. And that's a primary contributor to the fact that the large commercials are paying more than their fair share. And then the small demand commercials are paying less than their fair share. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then you've got, you've got some of these sort of pump rates, which are, the interesting thing is these are relatively small users. Again, no customer charge. And then the fact that they've got a flat energy, but the demand charge doesn't kick in until 5 kW. So a lot of times they don't pay any demand, and they're getting energy then for just 5.5 cents, which is kind of a bargain. And then you do have some net metering rates where the difference here really is the fact that you have a customer charge, because people with rooftop solar might have effectively zero net bill, but they're obviously using the system to export during the day and import at night. And so, you do have a customer charge for them so that they're making some kind of a contribution to the system, even though their net energy use is relatively low. And then, of course, you have some yard light rates, which you just with rate increases, those will just need to go up. So any questions before I move to the next topic relative to the discussion on rate design?
Yeah, I'd maybe just similar to the customer charge, purpose of a demand charge.
Yes. The interesting thing, so let's go back. So residential customers, there's a terminology that we use in the industry called load factor. And essentially it is a ratio of how much energy you use compared to how much demand you put on the system. So like a typical residential customer might use like 700 kilowatt hours with a demand of maybe 5 kW. The ratio of energy to demand with residential customers is oftentimes very similar, whether they're 300 kilowatt hours or 3,000 kilowatt hours. So that the demand related portion of their bill, which is based on a lot of the fixed infrastructure that we put in place, is kind of the same per kilowatt hour. So we're able to get away with an energy only rate. But what happens when we get to bigger customers, some of them might use a lot of energy all the time. So they use lots of energy per demand unit. So when we split their rate into a demand piece and an energy piece, the really good customers, the ones who use lots of energy per demand unit, end up with a lower effective rate, which is fair because they're more efficiently utilizing all of the fixed system we put in place. On the other hand, you can have large customers who still use a lot of demand at certain times, but might not use a lot of energy. So what happens under this rate design for them is their average is a lot higher. And it's fair because you've built all of this fixed infrastructure, but they're not pushing much energy through it. So larger customer classes in their usage of energy are less homogeneous than small commercial and residential. So within the industry, literally everybody has demand and energy rates for these bigger customers because quite frankly, they're more fair because of the vast differential in the way that they might use energy as compared to the demand that they put on their system. So it's not so much that they're big, it's more like because they're big, they can have lots of variations in how they use energy. And the only way to have something that resembles fair is to move to demand and energy rates. But that's why the energy rate that goes with the demand is lower, because in the residential class, all those fixed demand related costs are in the energy rate. Whereas with a larger customer, we collect some of those in the demand rate. So the effective energy rate at 5.5 cents is lower than that 10 to 12 cents that we saw in residential.
So say you've got a large customer, their business involves a lot of motors, for example, that are starting and stopping. Is that would be considered a demand or a larger demand, and they're not using?
It isn't, yeah, but it isn't the actual starting and stopping, because that, when you measure demand, you generally measure it over a 15-minute period. And the starting and stopping of a motor is more of a, what you can do is you get a bit of a voltage drop for a short period of time. I mean, we've even, all experienced in our homes that, like the air conditioner might kick on and a light will dim for just a second. But that's just a second. We don't measure demand in that short a period of time. That's more of a voltage sag issue. And so demand is more of a consistent amount of energy during a 15-minute period, not during a 2-second period.
Okay, thank you.
So the next thing I was talk about is purchase power. So for you folks, it's about 50% of your operating expense. And one of the things about purchase power is that you don't have any control over it. I mean, you contract through UAMPS and you've got your hydro and so on, and you manage it the best you can, but to a certain extent, there's a lot of forces outside of your control. For instance, the cost of energy in the market now because of natural gas. 2 years ago, natural gas was $1.50. Last week it hit $8.50. And natural gas, we use that to generate a lot of electricity. So we're seeing a lot of increased energy costs in the market. Now we estimated, your actual in 2021 that your average power cost was about 5.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is a pretty good rate. We're estimating it to be about 4% higher for fiscal 22, which is almost done. And right now we're expecting that it's going to continue to go up, but it's hard, to guess. Prior to now, you've had pretty stable power supply, and most of the UAMPS members have. And so it's been pretty easy to just sort of set your rates and have them be able to be in effect for a while, because that cost of wholesale power isn't moving around on you much. Now, many utilities have an automatic adjustment in their rates so that rates automatically change if costs go up or go down above or below what you're estimating that they should be. And in fact, Rocky Mountain Power has something very similar. They call it the energy balancing account, but they reset that every year. I mean, they go through a process, but that portion of the bill, it's not in their rates. It's an adder to their bill that they just have to go through a process every year to change that. There are a few utilities who have that. Spanish Fork, for instance, has an adjustment clause, but Lehigh looks like they're going to adopt one, and Brigham, it looks like they're going to adopt one. And I've had this conversation with your staff, and they're interested in this. And what I'll be doing is when I propose the rates, I'll do it with and without the adjustment clause. And so at that point, we'll have a conversation about kind of how it works. But basically it allows you, particularly if wholesale rates go up dramatically, then rates will automatically adjust rather than you having to actually change rates, on the rate schedule. And we'll talk about that more, and I'll have numerical examples when we get to the actual proposal for rates. I just wanted to kind of plant the seed relative to the concept. And you'll see the way Rocky Mountain Power does, there's an adder on your bill. It used to be 1.7%, and they filed to increase it to 3.5%. So you can see it's essentially almost a 2% rate increase for people, but they're not actually filing a rate case to do that. All they're doing is doing their annual adjustment. It does have to get approved by the commission, but it's fairly easy to prove, and they're generally, approved by commissions. And basically, this just talks about it removes the need to proactively change your rates for conditions outside your control. And the adjustments can be done either monthly or annually. For you folks, I'll be suggesting doing it on an annual basis, because you can have a fair amount of swings on a monthly basis, and you don't want to have people's retail bills jumping by 2 cents a kilowatt hour one month and dropping down 3 cents a kilowatt hour the next month, that kind of thing. So I'll be suggesting for you an annual adjustment, which is very similar to what I've done for Brigham and Lehigh. These kind of things are very common. Every investor-owned utility in the country has one. They call it fuel adjustment. They call it, market adjustment. I mean, like Rocky Mountain Power calls it the energy balancing account, but they're very, very common. So we're obviously going to need some revenue increases. And unfortunately, when you look back at those results, they may be fairly substantial. I'll be working with staff to come up with, I guess, probably what I would call the most palatable recommendation that we can have. Cost of service imbalances, some of that is going to get fixed in rate design. And so what you'll see is that some of those bigger customers are not going to see as much of an increase. And some of those small demand commercial are probably going to see a bit more of an increase, whereas the average increases will go across the very smallest commercial and residential. But I'll have basically a 23 through 26 rate plan to suggest to you. And then, and like I said, I'll do it sort of with and without a purchase power adjustment clause. So with that, I could ask if there's any questions.
What's the timeline? When would you have that available?
I would say probably sometime in June.
I think maybe Ty could answer this, but do our rates require public service approval?
No.
Well, that's the entity that controls the investor. For profit.
Yeah, municipal utilities are not rate regulated by the commission. You're self-regulated, so it's you folks.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So we've kind of known this is the trajectory we've been on. I think it's a perfect time that we had it studied. That's the good news, is that we're not in a crisis. It's something we've been really paying attention to. Our rates haven't changed since 2010. I think that's the last time we adopted the power rate. And so I'm pretty impressed with our guys, the fact that we've been able to, if you think about, well, I can only go back 4 or 5 years where we only had 1 or 2 employees, 2 failing substations. So the amount of investment that we've done, and have a full crew now of, 4 people without having any adjustments to rates up to this point. And really, we've been on that path, and it's really the cost of power. It hasn't been, because our guys are basically paying their own way through subdivision installations, which is awesome, because we've been able to have the crew, we've been able to buy and sell the materials, to to do that. And they basically pay for themselves on an annual basis through that activity. And so we were on that trajectory. The last couple of years it leveled off, and now there's pretty much we're at a point where with what's going on in the power world, there's not much else we can do operationally to hold down the fort, if you want to call it that. So
Ty, at what point did our reserve start going south? How many years is that?
so that's a hard thing because the reserves were only like cash in the bank versus the need on the system. I think we're in a much better financial system now, even though our reserves have come down because we have essentially three brand new substations.
Okay.
So I'm more comfortable with having the capital investments that we've made and only 1.6, fund balance versus if we had 3 million and a failing system.
Yeah, aging work to do.
Upgraded a lot of the electric.
Yep, and we still have, stuff to do. Like the other day when we had that outage, it was just like a little segment that got missed on the fuse coordination. Otherwise, it would have just been a localized outage. It was an area that, a bird tripped. And so, there's still these little things, but for most part, we don't have near the issues that we've had. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but the fund balance has been coming down, but we've also put an incredible amount of investment. We got a new bucket truck right now coming this week, just, so we can do more of the work ourselves. But
Well, and I just peeked at in 2017, the electric had 1.5 million and now you're at 1.6 million. So in the last almost 5 years, you didn't really eat into your electric reserves. They basically stayed steady.
So Dave or Ty, is there a regulatory range that reserve needs to be within?
No, every utility kind of has to make that in the municipal world kind of on your own. Now, it depends upon, one of the things is if you ever want to go to the debt market, to issue bonds, having healthy reserves helps your credit, score, if you will, for a bond rating relative to getting a better rate.
Okay.
But, where you set that, it depends on a lot of factors with utilities. Some utilities rely strongly on the electric to maintain good reserves to also help with water and sewer and so on. I have some utilities that also have a municipal gas utility, which also has good reserves. So then they don't necessarily need the high amount of reserves in electric. But as I mentioned, smaller utilities kind of need a more relatively high compared to larger when you compare to revenue. So there's a lot of different things that can impact having reserves at a certain amount, but certainly going negative is never the good option.
yeah, the other big consideration on our reserves is Clark and I have been looking at internal generation, meaning our own natural gas generator facility, and we've looked at hydro opportunities. And so depending on what else goes in the generation space or what we can buy power for, what the market's doing, having reserves means we have choices where we could bring something online if we had to in a shorter time frame. But if like what Dave said, if you got to go through the bonding process for absolutely everything you do, and you're like, hey, would like to bond for this, and they say, well, what do you got?
Yeah.
What do you got to go against it?
Probably not bonding tomorrow as is.
Yeah.
It's interesting that a couple of years ago, remember when natural gas was $1.50, at natural gas, there was an unlimited supply. It was going to be cheap forever. And, now here you are today, 2 years later, it's 8.5. It's just, you can't predict it.
But a big reason is because natural gas is replacing a lot of the
Coal-fired power
generation.
plants, yeah.
It's not necessarily just residential, but there's a lot of natural gas generation going online.
Well, and some things that have happened too is that, 2 years ago, we were in the early part of the pandemic. So the economy was in the toilet. And so, and we had a lot more gas in this country. And now we've started to export a lot of gas, liquefied natural gas, plus because of regulatory uncertainty, gas drillers aren't too excited about drilling new wells because it's a long-term investment. And they are a little bit concerned about where we're headed from a regulatory perspective and their ability to recoup that kind of investment.
Dave, is there any value in comparing our reserves with other similar situated entities?
Well, to a certain extent, you kind of are when you hire me, because I've worked all over the country for well 100 different utilities, and so I can bring that experience to bear for you. The other thing is when you look at other utilities in a static time, what you can't tell is if their amount that they've got is good or bad. I mean, I'm working with utilities right now whose reserve levels are really good, and I'm working with utilities right now whose reserve levels are not very good. So when you just look at the raw number, you also have to make the judgment about whether or not it's an adequate level for their specific situation before you can see how you would judge yourself against them.
Yeah, I think Ty's comment is well taken. Look at your infrastructure and see what's going to need to happen there.
And,
Yeah, I don't think-
and being able to just weather a storm too, so you don't go into panic mode. So, we've been fortunate, for a long time, but our seasonal, that's the other thing on the power, the price of power just seasonally is very wild versus even month to month. But last summer was, I was sweating last summer. And remember the thing that happened in Texas when you watch their rates go nuts. And the more we're subjected to the market, that's what's happening too, right? When we don't have our load covered by projects that we're invested in, then it's just a total crapshoot on what happens on price of power. So.
Dave, here we've gone for 10, 12 years without an increase, relatively stable arrangements. And your projections are showing some real wild changes short term, if you will, just within a few years. Is that telling us something about markets?
Oh, absolutely it is. And to a certain extent, the I used with both Lehigh and Brigham is that, if you remember the old Fram oil filter ads, you can pay me now or pay me later. And I said, well, welcome to later. Things are changing. And for a lot of folks who had, really stable power supply plus a reasonable amount of growth, the last 10 years, so that growth was helping to kind of pay for things as they were moving forward as well. Things are definitely changing, and the market is changing. Coal-fired generation is going away. A lot more renewables with the volatility there. Huge investments being made in the transmission system because of the changes that are going on in power generation. The continued and increasing reliance on natural gas, while at the same time as a country, apparently we're trying to phase it out. So, things are much more unstable than they were 10 years ago and even more than 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I wouldn't expect it to get any better. I wonder if this is a new norm. We're just dealing with uncertainty. And, that brings risk into what you're trying to do.
Well, and I've seen, I've been around a long time, natural gas. I've seen it, at $2 and I've seen it at $15. And so, things go in waves, but we rely so much more on natural gas than we did before. A lot of people are surprised to hear that back in the Carter years, it was illegal to generate electricity with natural gas. Since that's 50 years ago, it's kind of ancient history, I guess.
Is there a place for solar?
Well, there's gonna be a place for solar no matter what, but, you know, as we increase our reliance on renewables, it's gonna make things even more difficult because, you know, the mention of the Texas issue, as well as what happens on a regular basis in California when they got more solar than they know what to do with, and are having essentially their markets go negative because they have an overabundance of power. But then at night, they don't have enough power. So, you know,
That's what Tide tells us all the time.
Well, and that's why over the last 10 years, we've been able to just lock in a rate and produce base load power because we didn't have a variation on our demand. And the more solar you have, even on our own system, means in the middle of the day, we bought the power. People choose not to use it. We've already purchased it.
Pay for it.
Yep. You know, and then you
It's kind
don't,
of like water, it moves.
well, of course, the other wrinkle you have is the droughts and what's that doing to hydro too. So,
then when demand kicks up, then we're expected to have the power when solar comes offline. And then the interesting thing is that ramp up period between when all the solar comes off and when the demand hits, it's hard to find a resource that's going to say, oh, I'm going to go to zero to 100 megawatts in a matter of an hour.
And everybody wants it.
Yep. And so that's very expensive power, whoever can produce it at that point.
So Dave, what happens when they can't generate any hydro out of Lake Mead?
well, you gotta find it somewhere else. It's like when you rely on wind energy and the wind stops blowing, or when you rely on solar and the sun goes down.
So in hydro is 30% of our resource,
Morgan's. Yeah.
because we have ownership in the CRSP project. And so that's been also the best thing that we've had is that's a, you know, averages around like 30 cents a kilowatt hour. Or like wind is at 7 or 8. So
So we're talking about rate adjustments, things like that. And then the underlying problem is not the rate adjustment. That's still not going to solve your demand problem. You can charge more rate, but that doesn't,
I mean, there's gonna be more electricity there for us.
yeah.
Well, and you know, most fixes cost money, so you know, then the only place to get that is through rates.
It's a good base.
well, it load follows too. So it's just tons of variables with that too.
Yeah.
But the actual cost of the power on the back end of that still makes sense.
Don't know what that's gonna be.
Well, they guaranteed you a rate on that.
So as a council, what's our next step? What do we need to consider?
We just wait for Dave to finish, then he'll come back with a proposal
Okay.
for rates and we'll put it on the agenda at that point and then see what we're comfortable with. And
That'd be probably happen in the next 30, 60 days.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, yes.
If we decided to make a rate adjustment, we probably wouldn't be able to get it in before the start of the next fiscal year, would we?
That'd require a public hearing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it'll be close, but I mean, the point is just to get them balanced, the rate's fair, make sure that the costs are equitable because, you know, it's like the other ones. It's like, well, if your rate is a losing proposition, you don't want growth because all you're doing is exacerbating the problem, right? But if your rate's adequate and you have growth and everyone's paying
Fair share.
their share of the system, then you don't fear.
Well, plus you get some impact fees as well.
the growth. Yeah, well, but that's also that offset, right? So that's also something that's probably going to change in the future is a lot of our residential customers, there's a lot of electrical efficiencies per home now that exist that didn't before, right? And so that's why that other base fee also comes into play is because there's a lot of, you know, things are getting.
Well, just with lighting and better appliances, you know, we've had significant reduction in sales. You know, when you went from incandescents to CFLs to now LEDs and lighting, that was a lot of energy. And I know when I replaced my air conditioning unit on my house, my energy consumption dropped dramatically. When I went from an old
Refrigerators.
that was barely hanging on and fairly inefficient to a new high efficient unit, it was quite significant.
So how much has Rocky Mountain Power's demand gone up the last 3 or 4 years, or has it gone up because of these improvements in appliances?
You know, I don't know with Rocky Mountain Power, but I will tell you that the vast majority of my clients are lucky if they can just stay flat, that if they can have growth that will offset conservation, they feel pretty good. Now, you guys in Utah is some of the utilities are seeing significant growth, and that's there's not a lot of that going on. Other places.
They're actually exiting.
Well, that's.
Yeah, well,
that's-
California, a lot of them are seeing actually decreases, but
Yeah, that's what's interesting about Lehigh, and they're putting a new Morgan on every year. They're growing by a whole Morgan every year, right on. And that used to mean, oh, we don't have to worry about our rates. We don't have to worry about the customer charge because growth was
Paying for it.
paying for it. Now they're kind of in our same reality where it's like we're, facing a couple of real decision points here.
So that growth also must have meant there had to be some improvements on the system and some costs as well, I would think, right?
well, sure, and they've made a lot of investments, and now their biggest problem is trying to keep up with things like transformers to connect new customers with all of the supply chain issues, but
Okay. Dave, we appreciate all this information, and we really look forward to getting a solution presented to us.
yeah, I found that this works pretty well, I think, to kind of explain the issue at one meeting and then come back with the solution rather than hitting everything all at once.
Yeah, amen.
That's something to think about.
All right, well, you all have a good evening, and I'll be in touch.
So Dave, do you do
Thank
water
you.
studies also?
You know what? I actually do.
There we go.
And wastewater too, so,
And we're dealing with drought big time here.
Dave,
yeah, well,
get back to your grandkids.
all right, thanks much.
Yeah, your wife's gonna abandon you for a couple hours and you're gonna be on your own.
Maybe.
All right, thank you.
All right, good night, gentlemen.
Thanks, Dave.
Okay, we got about like 45 seconds. Obviously, we're not gonna have a work meeting on the other items. Quick questions? Open adjust the tentative budget.
No questions, but we're gonna have 45 seconds. Yeah, we'll just do them then. Can you get American Idol on that?
This meeting is adjourned.
Boys room.
Yeah.
Dave, I was gonna comment, a few years ago, I was on the council before we had a city manager, we all had like a certain portfolio.
Oh, yeah.
And I had water for a while. So I used to go to rural water when is that, in the spring? Yeah. So rural water, would always have I remember every year they'd have every municipality and they'd have the rate. But I used to drive myself crazy because there's always somebody higher, there's always somebody lower. And finally, one day I thought to myself, you know what, you could spin this any way you want to spin it. You've just got to do what's right for your city. What makes sense for your city. There's not one size fits all. It's just
Every system costs.
there's just, they're just, and that's kind of, I think, what he's saying here with the what he was talking about a little bit, Well, we're all different.
Big thing is there's never gonna be a forever stable.
Not like we have. I mean, I think you go to 12 years or something.
There's still a natural gas. We had oodles and gobs, and it was gonna be around forever. It wasn't gonna go up in price.
Vehicles were getting converted all the time. Yeah, you can't stabilize because you don't make a profit if you're stabilized. Yeah.
That depends, what did Gary say about that sentence? If they are living on agree with you, that sentence. I know it doesn't make any difference, but it will make it, you know, where they'd approve it. Call and see if we make that adjustment in the motion, then, and that's can, I mean, Ty's not in a hurry to get it done.
Right.
But, I mean, I just think the longer we hold on to it, they're just gonna have more. And it's gonna be at our cost. That's just. Did you want, oh, you printed yours out?
I printed me
You're
one.
good.
Hello, boss.
We'll get a cookie there. Leftovers from the other night. Everybody can eat them. Oh, yeah.
Great, you?
I'm surviving. Yeah.
Real quick, boss.
Just turn on the lights back.
Yeah.
Get it back. Is that door 2029 side?
Oh.
Where am I sitting?
No, after you showed that,
Yeah.
we
Oh,
got
yeah,
all
we got
that
the- yeah.
comparison with Rutland County was capture the total. So they have the $10, then we're, so we're like 20, what do you say, 20?
Still, I think it's like-
20%.
Yeah.
The bill, and then at the end, then they add, oh yeah, and then they have
You
a
want a copy of the
annual
budget, or
adjustment
did you print one out?
that they just add based on the, for the years, and then they have like different tiers that we can't even. So we're just saying that Some don't recognize.
I did print one of them, Denise. Is that in my packet?
But what he's saying is like, when we look at our.
Is that in my packet?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But if you want, this will just be easier. You won't have to pay for it.
I would just adjust.
You got
When
an
they-
extra?
Yeah, when they start talking about stuff.
Yeah, you have that spread. Up to.
And if it goes down, you go down, but if it goes up.
So I'll bet that's from,
Mike Lee.
tell you that is.
That's why we.
I thought that'd be from Donald Trump.
Make another update.
They probably want to print them billions, let you know.
Printing off money all we can. Senator Mike Lee. I'll sit back up.
Welcome to the Morgan City Council, May 10th, 2022. We'd like to welcome those that are joining Zoom, if we have anybody, and also like to welcome our beloved mayor who's sitting in with us today. I didn't ask anybody. Could you give the pledge?
Sure.
How are you playing today? Okay.
All arise. Repeat after me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Our Father in heaven, as we convene our city council meeting this evening, we wish to take this opportunity which we have to express our thanks and gratitude every day for our many blessings. We're grateful, Father, for this beautiful valley in which we live. We're grateful for the freedoms and blessings that we enjoy. We're grateful for the opportunity to serve. We're grateful, Father, for the peace that we enjoy in this valley, and that Thou continues to bless and watch over us. We ask, Father, that Thou might guide and direct our thoughts and actions this evening. We might act in a responsible way, that we might do those things and be guided and directed by Thee to be able to make decisions that will benefit our community and be for the good of all. Father, we're grateful for those who have preserved our freedoms, and for those who have ultimately given their lives for our freedom, and those currently serving in the service, partaking and watching over us. We ask and pray that Thou might bless and be with them and watch over them. Father, at this time, as the world seems to be in a turmoil, we would pray for that Thou might guide and direct the thoughts and actions of those who serve as leaders of the countries throughout the world. And Father, bless them, that they might have Thy Spirit to be with them, to guide and direct them, and that we might be able to find peace and solutions among the nations of the world. And that those who seek to oppress and take freedoms away from others, their hearts might be softened by Thee, and that they too might seek peace and resolution in the world. Again, Father, we pray for Thy Spirit to be with us this evening, to guide and direct us, and we say these things in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Before we begin, I just was thinking about what Tony was saying in his prayer, and I was thinking about it today, how blessed we are in this area of the world, in this area of our country. We have problems, but we certainly don't have monumental, huge issues, which I can't say huge because the problems depends on who's facing it. That can determine how big it is, but thank you for that prayer. Okay, I would like to excuse Eric. He won't be with us tonight. And before we move on, is there an approval of tonight's meeting's agenda? Or any changes that we need to make or want to make?
Mayor, I'd move to approve the agenda.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll move on with this agenda. Minutes of the city council work meeting, April 26, 2022. Gary, I was going to ask, are we able to go ahead and do A and B at the same time?
Yes, sure.
Okay. And then also minutes of the city council meeting on April 26, 2022. Is there any discussion or comments on that?
I'd have one change. I think it's in the work meeting, Denise, on page 4. Under general plan. Just that first paragraph under general plan, I think the date should be May 17th rather than June. Okay, yeah, that's all I have.
Is there any other changes?
That was about the meeting that the mayor wanted everybody to come to,
Yes.
and it is scheduled for June 2nd. So.
I thought it was May 17th.
Yeah, I think it's the next meeting. Yeah, I think it's the next week.
Next week.
Okay. Yeah, the 17th wasn't a Tuesday. It would have been. The 21st was a Tuesday in June. Mayor, I've reviewed and read the minutes as well as the warrants and would move to approve the minutes of the city council work meeting with the one change of April 26th, 2022, the minutes of the city council meeting of the same date and the warrants from 4/22 to 5/6/22.
It's given us a motion to accept. Is there a second?
I'll second that, Mayor.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Okay. I don't believe we have anybody registered for public comments, Denise? Okay. The settlement and agreement between on the active agenda, settlement and agreement between Morgan City and North Morgan water users, resolution 2214. Is there any comments, discussion? Has everybody had a chance to read through that? There's a lot of it in there.
Let me just throw out for discussion, Mayor, and that is, I don't know that I feel real strong about it, but we went from the word shareholder as a member of the association to a preferred customer. For some reason, preferred customer just seems a little bit odd to me. Does that mean we have non-preferred customers, et cetera? Would there be a better term for that individual versus shareholder or a preferred customer? North Morgan Water, user, customer, or abbreviate it for NMWA for short, NMWA customer. Or is there a better term that would be out there?
Because eventually there wouldn't be really a preferred customer, correct?
Only for the 30 years, I guess.
Yeah, 30, well, I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
eventually.
but I mean, we say preferred, how do I become a preferred customer, da, da, da. Well, if it's the NMWA, it's not a, I mean, yeah, I know I'm not part of that.
I think the reason we changed shareholder, help me if I'm getting this wrong, but because the shares they won't be
Turned over.
turned over, so they'll be surrendered.
Treasuries.
And a preferred customer, I don't find anything, if we can find another word. It sounds,
Yeah, it sounds like we're making a preference. It just seemed a little bit uncomfortable, but not that it doesn't work.
I think
Short of a
that
better word, I guess we go with.
Charter customer,
A what?
charter.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to come up with different ones and it's, other than the North Morgan, I couldn't come up with a good one.
you could, does that sound feasible, Gary, if we abbreviated preferred with NMWU? Or we could spell it out.
Company would be,
It's dissolved.
We don't type the company, we just type the.
What about like contract customer?
There you go. Maybe that's it right there. I tried to think of an agreement customer, but that's the word, Ty.
What'd you say?
Contract customer.
So they're all gonna have a contract, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah, they get their preferred status because of a contract.
I'm just saying, I mean, that just maybe helps staff too, where it's like I'm a contract customer, meaning I have a contract in place.
Yeah, I agree. Preferred sounds.
Well, it's preference. So that's preferred means like special rate, special.
Yeah, why are we treating
It makes sense to us that have been through all of this, but yeah, for somebody to come read that.
years from now, why are they
preferred?
preferred and I'm not?
Oh, yeah, that will go, that'll eventually go away.
So like, I was just thinking like we have contract employees, we have contract,
Bingo.
uh,
And if a community member can talk the council into a contract for them individually, more power.
well, they
to
don't
them.
need one. Well, you don't need a, right? So
Yeah.
it's like a
No,
rate payer is just a rate
Well,
payer, but a contracted rate.
it sets the tone that something has happened to make them be
Special?
a different,
Yeah.
Special.
preferred.
So we're
Exceptional.
sorry, Gary, that we excused Mason. But I guess we can get this info to him. Does that sound all right with you, contract?
Yeah,
Because they are, that's what makes them different.
Yeah. which they have done. They've signed a contract.
I'll get that to you.
Bring that up. Throughout the document.
Yeah, he's approving of it. There were some other recommendations.
Yeah, and I think I'm gonna go ahead and present that tonight to the council. And this would be on page 7. On page 7 and H, 3H,
Let's talk about
on the North Morgan agreement.
you changing the name, you mean, or?
You see preferred, it'll
Yeah.
not say contract.
I changed it on this. I just wrote that, but that isn't, this is a change in the paragraph of on 3H,
What page was that?
7.
Yeah, the one in the packet has the strike out and add it. Is in the copy, so it's in,
All right.
is that where the two strikes are?
Yeah, the strikeouts are here.
Where are you looking?
I-
Well, my file is
Reed's got a
certainly
copy
different.
than we do. I think you're on track.
We're all on the same page.
I'm okay with 7?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, after a little bit of discussion with the board on this,
With the Water Board.
North Morgan Water Users Board. They've kind of rearranged this paragraph, and I guess it's okay if I just read it. It pretty much is all the same except for one area. If a preferred customer intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly fails to put all or a portion of the delivered water to beneficial use, leaks, wastes, etc., then the preferred customer's modified rate shall not apply, and the city shall charge said preferred customer the standard and customary rates for all water delivered until such failure to put to beneficial use is fully abated. If a preferred customer violates this subsection 3 or more times, the city shall terminate said preferred customer's modified rate effective upon delivery of written notice. A reasonably undetected leak, this is what they've added, a reasonably undetected leak shall not constitute a failure to put water to beneficial use. Is there any interpretation or discussion?
Ty, is that are you able to monitor that?
It essentially says the exact same thing as the rest of the paragraph.
So you don't feel too bad about it?
I don't. The other thing is this is the agreement between us and the association. And so whatever language is in individual contracts, I don't think is necessarily dictated by this verbiage, right? So when we make the contract, when we enter into that contractual agreement, the language doesn't have to match this exactly anyway. This is just saying, here's what we recognize, here's the terms, here's what we all agree to. And so if it helps them feel better about the intent behind the language, I have no problem with it. But it doesn't, we don't have any other intent. That language doesn't
Change the intent.
doesn't do any, doesn't even cause me to blink. It's like just stating the same thing with different words. So
What if, nodding yes.
What if,
In the contract, I'm sorry,
no, go ahead.
in the contract, we have control of that aspect. That has changed, even with their wording, it's still our.
Right.
Kind of look at that.
it's our determination, but it's also our burden of proof, right? So if we say, hey, you're neglectfully leaking water, or you're knowingly leaking water, or you're whatever, the point is that the leak gets fixed. But the burden of proof of us trying to prove their intentions is not a likely scenario. So I don't see under any reasonable scenario where we go after one of our own water customers in that manner, unless it's so belligerent.
So,
Well, and
so what if you hypothetically, let's say you're a contract customer.
Mhm.
Currently, I mean, so I'll just throw a number out there. You have up to 120,000 gallons. Okay.
Sure.
So for, I guess all of us, I suppose, we could say that we have our 8,000 gallons, and if we had a leak of any size, we would probably see it reflected on our bill the next month, correct? We'd say, whoa, I just went from 31 to
Yeah.
$60.
Well, you come in with a $600 bill saying, what the heck,
Yeah, yeah.
or something.
But if you have
Not appropriate.
150,000 gallons and it's you and, the two of you say, and all you have is your home and your yard, and typically you're using 6,000 gallons or 7, whatever. But you have a leak and all of a sudden that jumps up to now 60 or 70 or 80,000 gallons a month. That customer is not going to, that contractor is not going to see it reflected on their bill, correct? But they'll
Well-
see it on their usage on their bill, but they won't see it on the bill itself
In your wallet.
in your wallet. So would we monitor that, or would it be, would that be the responsibility of the contract customer to make sure he's looking at that bill saying, this is a
No.
reasonable amount of water I should be using?
It'll be on us to monitor, right? But if we go make contact and say, hey, you just went up by 50,000 gallons, and they say, oh yeah, it's because I just filled my swimming pool. And we say, oh,
In
okay,
December,
we get it. Bad example, sorry, too
Yeah.
close to home for But anyway, I couldn't think of another one-time use, right? So if it's 2 months in a row, or you also notice that time of day, the meter never stops running. You just say, hey, you got a leak. And then when you go back and forth, if there's a leak, we put them on the normal rate until it's fixed. So that's not, we don't even get in the business of intent. All we say is, you got an issue here, you're paying the normal rate till it's fixed. And then they have that incentive that the rest of, you know what I mean? It's like, well, you're on the normal rate now because you have a $600 water bill. Now it's worth it to get financially to get it fixed.
I guess my question really boils down to, I assume there's a lot of people probably that when they get their city bill, they look at, all right, what do I owe? What was my?
Yeah, what you owe, not what you use.
What was my water bill? They, it's there, but if you're not, I don't imagine a lot of people look at it.
Yeah.
And so theoretically, I guess what I'm saying, so if we see that anomaly,
Mhm.
we'll approach that customer and say, okay, something doesn't look right here, so.
Yeah.
Even if if it doesn't get above the amount of water.
Right, exactly, that would kick in the overage, that's what I'm saying.
Well, before it kicks in the overage.
Like I say, if you had 120,000 gallons of water, you should only be using 8,000, now all of a sudden you're using 60 or 70 in the middle of the winter.
Well,
Something's probably, you're still not gonna see it on your bill, but something's probably not right.
it'll be typical use, right? So we'll just look at typically this uses, and then we'll also go through a little process where we say, hey, wait a minute, that's only a quarter acre lot, that's
Right.
a single retired person living at home with no garden, no animals. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Then we would just say, let's go look at it. It's not gonna be constant, but we'll look for those anomalies.
Yeah,
And then we'll have to follow up with them because there's no other way to do this other than to take the time and effort to check with people. But like that process though that I like is we just say, hey, we go check with them. It's really easy to say, shut everything off in the house. And if the meter's still running,
you got a leak.
you got a leak, right? So then we just say, we'll put you on the normal rate. Let us know when your leak's fixed. We'll come out and check again. If it's fixed, great. If it's not, you stay on the normal rate until it's fixed. But see, that whole process has nothing to do with intent. It's just it is what it is. And so at the end of this, what it's saying is if it's perpetually like, we've been there, you fix, we get you back on, on and off, and it's like 3 times and we're not getting anywhere. It's the same issue that's being ignored, or we get told to pound sand. Then we just come back and say, let's start the process just to nullify the contract. Because
What is the line they want to add?
Well, I think, back to that, the point is that adding that line doesn't increase your burden in our end of the contract. So
no, it's no big
I
deal.
don't see a problem.
Usually undetected leak shall not constitute a failure to put water to beneficial use.
So my feeling with this, my feeling with this is with any other utility we kind of elected not to be the police of it. That would be up to the.
Well, no more than we
customer.
otherwise are in, like you say, any other utility. I mean, if David was using 50,000 gallons a month, you'd probably, the potential's there that I could give me a call.
Yeah,
You also know because of your bill.
the only other way, don't
You look at your bill.
Mary does.
Well, it doesn't go very long before someone knows, even if they're on equal pay, right, that gets
Yeah.
adjusted in a big way or something. But the only other way to kick this back to the user is to say, if you have a leak and you don't fix it, there's a fine or a penalty, right? Or if it's found out that you've been wasting water for the last 6 months, and there's a penalty, like a $2,000 penalty for wasting water, which that would be an incentive for someone to monitor their own usage, puts the ball back in their court. It's probably just not something we're willing to go that direction.
We've made it
Because
this,
that just turns into a fight. And so I don't think it's a huge deal. I just think it's something we monitor as we go and
Well, and the one word, the contract customer is somewhat different than anybody else.
go look at the contract.
Because of the contribution of the spring and things like that, they're a contract customer, not necessarily a preferred customer, but.
Yeah.
So maybe on a contract customer issue, if there's a big leak in the winter, it would be all right to make a note on the bill. I don't know. I'm just trying to
A phone call,
figure out what.
a visit.
Do all the things you
Yeah.
normally do. I mean, you
Normally
spend the
do to-
summer doing that. Just keep
It'd be
doing
a
it.
courtesy call.
well, and
I know to one gentleman, it was a very courtesy call to help out with that. Wow, that's a big bill. Not that we took money away from it, but it was a positive move of the city to correct this problem, to help him. And so this separated from any other water company that I know is a big contribution to the system. And so we'll call it a contract customer, and we might be able to say that maybe we could say, I would love it if somebody said, Steve, you just used 50,000 gallons in January and maybe you have a problem. But it's a courtesy call to turn the water off at the meter and see if the meter's still spinning, correct?
Or at the house, shut off at the house, and then if the meter's still spinning.
We did quite a bit of that, didn't we, last summer?
Yeah, it's not and really, I think not that we're going down the wrong road, but to me, this is just the agreement between us and the company, right? To close on the property and how we're gonna transact the compensation for water rights. And then in the contract between us and the contract customers, where a lot of maybe the mechanics or process, get spelled out or handled. I mean, this doesn't change anything. I think what I'm reading is like, hey, we want to protect ourselves against the bad intent of the city.
Of the city coming at us.
We're not even talking intent. We're just saying, we're talking, man, that you got a leak or you don't. It's either you're using your water or you're not. You used it, you pay. You used X amount, that's the rate.
Everybody else does.
But I just don't ever see the city going down the road where we're worried too much about the intent of something, you know what I mean? Like, we just don't do that.
Okay.
So I'm having you know what I'm saying? I mean, you've seen some of the letters too, right? Like, hey, it's not my fault. It was a water leak. It's like, well, I'm not blaming anybody. You didn't cause a leak. Yeah, I know you didn't cause a leak. We're just saying there is a leak.
Yeah.
Let's get it fixed.
Well,
Get the water back in the pipes where it belongs.
End of the day, you're just trying to conserve water.
and one of
Make it
the,
available to everybody on the system.
one of the things that is there is if it's on the city side, we fix it.
Oh, yeah.
We don't say anything other than we fix it if it's on the city side. If it's on the other side, it should be expected the same thing.
Yeah, then we just cause to have it fixed, right? So it's,
Okay.
and it's just a communication exercise, but it's not like we're not, like, customer service is what we do. We're all just trying to help everybody make the water available and put it to beneficial use, right? And just like you said, like 99% of everybody, if you came and said, you have a 200,000 gallon leak this month or usage, and they say, I have no idea where that water went. My next thought is, man, is my house gonna fall in a sinkhole? Like, I'm worried about that. Not like, stay out of my business. And so that isn't a reality, I guess is what I'm saying, is the concern doesn't play out on a daily basis in in my experience anyway, with, man, most people are just so reasonable.
Sinkhole will be your neighbor.
Well, and then I also want to know if that was my leak that caused my neighbor's house to fall in a sinkhole.
Tell
This somebody's car.
Yeah.
Gary, I apologize that we are pushing this forward. With the company reaching out, and putting this addition on, it might be something that the council can move forward on now, and we can accept the
Were there any
agreement.
other recommendations?
That's it. That's it. Other than the changes that have been made on the different drafts that have come up. So the change would be their paragraph that they added, and then rewording it to a contract customer.
Okay.
Ray?
Put a word possibility to consider. 3E, apply.
On 3E triple I, I'd propose we consider adding the word average in front of the word rate on that second line. The preferred customer shall be charged a standard and customary water overage rate. Right. Just put the word overage in it. Same as the verbiage above it. But I think we just the word overage. Right.
I'm on 3E, and I've got it all crossed out.
Turn the page.
I've got the non-crossed out version, sorry.
Go to page 5, aren't we? On ours.
Where it says accept the shares for the shares.
So go to page 6, it'll be right there. That one's underlined.
The modified rate. Is that where we're talking
No,
about?
The one above.
The one above it, the preferred customer?
Shall be charged.
Preferred customers shall be charged the standard and customary water. I'd add the word overage rate. Just a section.
Instead of just a rate, overage rate.
Just add.
You would
the word
add overage.
Just add the word overage.
Customary overage rate.
Customary water overage rate. Yeah, 3 I.
3 eyes.
I.
6 on ours.
The other one would be on F, the next paragraph. Toward the bottom of that paragraph, it's got the word, the redemption shall. That term redemption ought to be the modified rate. Instead of the word redemption. That paragraph's talking about the modified rate, not the redemption, not redemption of the shares.
Where was you, Ray?
Letter X paragraph
On
down,
F.
letter F.
On 3F.
Oh.
3F, second line from the bottom of that paragraph, 3F. Yep, rather than, yes. Just change modified rate and redemption. That's the paragraph about modified rate, not redemption.
Yeah.
Good changes.
Okay, is there any more discussion?
Yeah, I just have a question. So it says, when we're talking about the appraisal, I've got my paperwork all messed up here. So it says they have like 30 days after the 30 days after the agreement goes into effect. I guess my question is simply, when would the agreement go into effect? Would that be tonight?
When they sign.
The Babe's still got to sign, right? Okay,
What's that looking like, Steve? Are they lined up to go along with it?
I think everything's settled good, except
If we said to them, here's our half of it signed, as soon as you do it, we're good.
yeah, I think what we'd need to do is once again employ Mason to write up these changes and then get that copy to him. Or Denise,
Are you okay? So I think we're ready to go.
and we could have that copy given to them. And they can work that over. But that was the other changes we made. That was the only change that they were making was that that one sentence they put at the end of that paragraph. And then my understanding on the appraisals is once both parties sign, then it's a 30-day, which we'd have to get an appraiser lined up in these days, I think.
and so would that, it's so would they, right?
Yeah.
Unless they agreed to use ours.
Unless they agreed to use ours.
Yeah,
But that was my question about when it's the effective date, so it would be when they sign.
I do have an appraiser that I started before we went to mediation, just to get an idea of, and then I put a pause on it, so I didn't have to redo it. I wanted to not do it until after the agreement, right? So if we went in already having an appraisal in hand, it probably wouldn't go along with the agreement.
Can I- Okay.
So what we'll do is confirm all of the changes that were made before tonight, and then we will just indicate new changes.
Underline.
And then,
So I'll just go with the clean copy that I have, because that's all that, so just a clean copy, then I'll underline.
and then if we give them-
Well, Mayor, I am ready to take a whack at this, okay?
If you want to just incorporate changes that we talked about,
I'll mention them if you want. I think
if you wish. you can do
I
that.
think I got it. I think I got it written down here, so. Okay. So I move to adopt resolution 2214. A settlement and agreement between Morgan City and North Morgan Water Users Association with the following changes. And I'm not sure where this is at. It's on H, I guess, I'm not sure which, but is it 3H? The line is added, a reasonably undetected leak shall not constitute a failure to put water to beneficial use. Also, a change that wherever the term preferred customer is used, it be changed to contract customer. Also on my page 6, under 3I, the preferred customer shall be charged the standard and customary water overage rate. Add the word overage. And the paragraph down at the bottom of the paragraph, it reads, the redemption shall not apply to future enlarged connections, be changed to the modified rate shall not apply to future or enlarged connections. And all else is the same as your copy.
Nice. Well done.
Did that work?
Tony presented a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Tony and a second by Dave, and I believe this is nay?
Do a roll call.
Jeffrey?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
Tony?
Aye.
Aye.
Dave? Okay, Denise, it passes.
A lot of work.
I feel like,
Where's the cake?
Well, they haven't signed yet.
Pizza party.
Thank you, Ray, for all your help.
So. I
Thank
think
you, Ray.
For the hours and hours and
Yep.
and hours.
Okay. Item B, open and adjust the 2021 and 2022 fiscal year budgets, resolution 2218. Do we include C with this too? Resolution 2219, or do we discuss both of them? Well, I guess they're different years, so yes.
Too much paperwork.
Yes, there's a lot, isn't there? Dave,
Need some red tabs.
yes, I'm gonna try to implement that.
Resolution 22, 18, and 19.
Okay, I'm there.
Oh, here we go.
Okay, is there any discussion on resolution 2218?
I have a couple of questions. Tab number 1.
I don't have tabs.
Okay. Okay. So I wanted to look at the overall picture. This is, I'm talking about the amended budget versus the tentative budget. And looking and trying to get a feel or an idea of if we didn't have the one-time monies or the government funding, and some of that is, I mean, whatever comes in goes out. I can appreciate the changes in the total revenues and expenses because of it. But if we just looked at revenue, the taxes and permits, the income there, I get a net increase of about $45,000 between the taxes and permits. But yet, if we look at expenses, administration's up 100 grand, buildings up 51, roads are up 46, and we do get a little benefit from the parks. They were down 22. That's 175,000 going out. That's an increase. We've got 45,000 coming in. That where's the rest of that 130? I mean, how are we paying for that? And so that'd be one question. How's it paid for? But the second question is, I mean, that doesn't seem to be sustainable to me. Even if we do it this year, we've got to have enough revenue coming in to pay those increased expenses.
Can I piggyback on that, Dave, just a little bit? I just got curious when I looked at wages and benefits and you know, the different wages and benefit. And the increase between I was looking at the 22 original budget and the 2023 tentative budget. And maybe my math's wrong, it could be. But I see like $198,000 in increase in wages and benefits on this tentative budget. So so my question was the same, kind of the same thing. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I just, how do we cover it? Or
Yeah.
how does that work? That's
So, you know, I throw out, there was a couple of things that I saw that helps balance that. We had ARPA money, 253 coming in and only 100 going out. In other words, can some of that money be put towards these expenses, or is that a specific, you know, line item that has to go in a certain direction?
Yeah, so no, those are restricted funds. So,
Okay,
that
that doesn't help.
but it is, some of it is just restructuring. So it's gonna be really difficult to show, but we did add an employee. And then the constant restructuring between the general fund versus the enterprise funds. And so I have a spreadsheet that has all of the employees, all their costs, and then what percent we pay each person. So like I'm only 30% administration, but there's a lot of people that are a percent of administration. So depending on where those shifting in duties fall, that's what budget line item it lands in, if that makes sense. So it does incorporate the tentative budget incorporates us 7% cost of living increase, but some of the benefits are actually lower than the or, you know, less of an increase than the salaries were. And that's easier to see on my employee spreadsheet than the actual budget. But the other thing to note is every year it's a different scenario, but it's a balanced budget. So it's the revenues and the expenses do come to zero. The tentative budget is, so if you go to, let me find it. So like on the revenue, if you look at the original 2022, the original budget was $3,050,919. The tentative budget for 2023 is actually less. So it's less from the original, so that did include some grant money that we anticipated at the beginning of 22. And so even 2023, I just started with more of a blank slate. The other thing is the tentative budget has a lot of work left to do in it.
Bill, that's what you're opening up next month for public hearing, right?
Right, yeah, so I'm, between now and then, I'm putting a lot more work in the tentative budget, for sure.
I see.
But what was your original question, Dave? Because I don't know if that helps. I'm just saying that we do have constant shifting of employees. The other thing we have is when we did employee recognition, I pulled that out into its own line item. Across different categories because it was just included in salaries and wages before. That's another one that I could present it in a different format if that helps, or I'm not exactly sure what the question is.
I guess again, I see the increases. I'm fine with it. We can cover it. I'm fine with it. I just see that we had what looks to be like almost a $200,000 increase in wages and benefits for, and then when I go back and I look at the last page on page 5, and I see that the total expenditures on the amended budget are 3.9 million. But then the tentative budget's back down to 3 million. So that, not $900,000, is that some of the
Time money, yeah, grants.
ARP money and some of that money, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, so I don't know if anybody went through my line by line.
Yes.
Yes, I did.
By the way, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Right, so if you get to the bottom of that, the total revenue increased 876,000.
Yeah.
From the projected, that's just this is just from this year's amended budget. So,
Yeah, but a lot of that's the one-time stuff.
right, but what I'm saying is it's gonna be very difficult to compare this year's budget to next year's tentative budget, because the document that I made that has the 4 pages of changes. All of those changes were unexpected. From the beginning of the budget year. I mean, we always amend the budget, but there was just a lot of significant changes. The other thing, after that increase on page 5, if you notice at the bottom of the 2022 amended budget includes almost $400,000 to be transferred into the capital improvements fund.
Okay,
Right, so that transfers above and beyond the increase in expenses. So even though we had increased revenue of $800 and something thousand, we only spent about half of that increase, and we're transferring about $400,000 into capital projects. And
say that
so
again, you had 800 in,
increased revenue
okay,
and about
right.
400 that got spent.
But that's the restricted nature of it.
Well,
Yeah, those are restricted.
well, not all of it. Some of it was increased sales tax. Some of it was increase in tourism,
Okay,
you know,
well,
from
yeah.
our projected.
Well, again, I'm only
budget.
getting 45,000 if I try to separate those from just our normal day-to-day operating revenue. I get 60, on our total taxes, we're up 62,000 from the
Oh, I
amended
see.
budget.
Yeah,
And our license to permit are down 17. So
Yeah.
that would be up, we'd be up 45. So
mhm.
if that's what we're getting to operate on day to day, and yet these are, I mean, administration, building inspections, roads and parks would seem to me that those are day to day expenses, and I'm getting 130 there. And just trying to separate some of that one-time stuff and other going back and forth, but 45 is not going to cover the 130. I mean, let's look at a couple of specifics, you know, for example, building inspection, salaries and wages from 45 to 80, from 22 to 23, the employee benefits,
68,000.
78% increase, the employee benefits 22 to 55, a 67% increase. The road department salaries are up from 100 to 135, employee benefits 43 to 70,
85,000 increase over the.
30.
So of the revenue, what part of our revenue in 2023 is not sustainable?
Well, no, I don't know. I'm not saying that revenue isn't. I'm just saying that the net between revenue and expenses may not be. I mean, again, and it may just be my understanding, but I'm coming up 130,000 short. If I'm just looking at the basics, just what does it cost to run the city? What do we get in, you know, in revenue for that? And these are changes, by the way. You've got, again, I've got 130 extra expenses and only 45 extra revenue in changes between 2022 and 2023.
Original to tentative?
Yeah, well, no, amended budget. I'm thinking, my assumption there is that we've got the amended budget, we're 45 days away. That's probably going to be pretty close to the way things are going to look for the year.
Right. Yeah, that's where. most of my
So,
time spent.
in other words, we're probably comparing 22 to 23 by that amended versus the tentative. And in that comparison, we've only got 45,000 in additional revenue, and yet in comparison, we've got these expenses. A couple of, you know, prominent ones were the roads and the park and the salaries and that, and the building inspection. But it's, I guess I can't match them up dollar for dollar. I can appreciate the fact that it's balanced, but is the balancing part of it sustainable from one year to the next?
Yeah. So in the 2023, even though I have, you know, additional work to do,
Mhm.
it doesn't include any additional revenue, just straight estimated tax revenue.
Okay.
And so all of those expenses equal the revenue. So it's a balanced budget in 2023. And there's no, there's only a $78,000 grant. It's the only grant in that revenue picture. And the rest of it is actual operational revenue. If that makes sense.
It probably does. I just need to
No,
understand.
Well, and it's difficult, but like if you go to Parks is gonna spend a lot less next year than it did this year, but again, all the expenses are because of one-time
Events.
grant or one that's in the budget, so.
So if we look at sales tax,
I'm just trying to think, maybe there's a better way I could,
if we look at sales tax 2022 actual.
Yep.
At 982,000.
Yep.
And we're saying in the 2023 tentative, we're up to 1.3 million. I mean, obviously, there's a little over $300,000 right there, correct? Also with the, and also with the transportation sales tax, that's up what, 180, 170 roughly, so. And I assume that's what you're talking about. That's where you're coming up with that.
yeah, so.
Increased revenue.
Yeah, so I guess maybe that's another way to look at it, is it, you'll have to help explain why that's going to happen or why it's realistic.
Yeah, so, so line item by line item, so the
Maybe that's what we need to look.
well, no, sales tax. So for example, the property tax, again, that's an assumption. We budgeted 390, we got 405.
Yeah, and that's not a bad.
That's not a big deal.
Changing a lot
The
there.
estimate on the current sales tax at 982 has 3 months of an average of 90, 100,000
Yes,
left.
You've still got time to go. In other words, that amended budget, the 1 point.
Should capture that. But then the other thing is with inflation, everything's gonna cost, every purchase is gonna cost X amount of dollars more than it did now, which is also additional sales tax revenue. So even without new business online, that's just an assumption,
If
right?
they sold the same, we'd have a.
Yep, the sales tax for transportation, the county just adopted a local option sales tax that we currently don't
It did
receive.
pass.
It did, but they didn't do it by resolution, but they did 2 quarters. So we'll get an additional quarter percent. Which essentially doubles, and that 400 is reflected in the road budget.
Okay, so there's part of an answer right there.
Right there
So
on-
some of that road budget is coming from that.
Yeah, if you go to intergovernment revenue, that 78,000 is a trails grant that we just got. So we do know about that one for next year.
But that'll go back out, right?
Yep.
That'll 78 will be spent on trails.
Yeah, exactly. But for each one of those line items, it's restricted. There's an offsetting exact
Okay,
expense on the expense
I
side.
saw that. Yeah, I saw, and that's what I was trying to separate to say.
Yeah, and
We
so,
didn't have these, COVID, whatever you want to call them, one-time events, which we didn't have before. We won't have, we may be, I don't know, close to the end of that. What's this going to look like?
yeah. The other thing is there's an effort that even though, and this is just budget, right? So if we see a decline, so our sales tax revenue comes down or something else is happening, or we just don't have as many building permits, the offsetting expense associated with that activity also goes down, right? So on a consistent basis, I put an operational report that says we're 25% into the new year, and every line item else, I can see that we're, either 25 above or below 25% spent. So that's what my job is to keep us on track with the budget. So the budget's like an up to amount unless we have an amended. But it is, I don't know what the right And yeah, I don't know, every year's a different scenario, but we operationally have a lot of control on expenses, I guess.
Let me, I guess, let me just ask on, rather than go through every line item, just a couple that seem to stand out. And Tony, I think you're knocking on the same door, but building inspection, salary and wages went from 45. Again, I'm going to say that's actual, but I realize we still got 45 days, but it'll go from 45 to 80.
So in this next year, we're going from contracted to in-house.
Okay, I wondered. I mean,
Internal,
that's a
right?
great
So it's
answer.
so right now we're kind of paying double because I'm paying a employee to go through the training to become a certified building official, but we're also currently paying the contract.
Right.
Right, and so building permits cover that expense one way or the other. However, we mostly, not all of it, right? But
Will that process go longer than a year? Or do you expect?
no,
it to be done?
it's almost there. And so so maybe I'll go to that expense category in
Just building inspections.
building inspections. So if you look down at professional technical planner services, our amended budget's 130,000. And next year I'm expected to be able to bring that down to 90 because we brought it in-house. So
Yeah, that's all.
But in some of your parks and recreation, public property, your salaries and wages and employee benefits, you show that dropping, correct?
well, and some of the, yeah,
Can't
so.
put employees around.
Well, so some of that is what we've done internally with the parks is the parks department now has 3 full-time people that we only had seasonal before, but those full-time employees take care of all of the green space for every department. So their employees aren't paid 100% out of parks, they're paid
Cemetery as well.
well, and the sewer pays 20% of their salary to do all their weeds. The water department pays them to do all the well protection,
Okay.
source protection. Does that make sense? And so that one, that just with the restructuring, some of those costs for just that department shifted over to other departments that are receiving the service.
Salaries and wages go from 40 to 70 and benefits from 15 to 25. Are you expecting to hire more there also?
No, we have a third employee there currently,
So this just reflects that
Mhm.
employee hasn't been here the full year.
right? And then some of it's guessing on the benefits on that offset. So the insurance buyout, I'm not exactly sure if the new employee is gonna do insurance buyout or not, so that benefit number changes, but that's something else I just pulled together. If you remember the other meeting when I said we're saving about $40,000 in the insurance buyout, it's actually 80. We're up to 80,000 on that, but where those employees are, each department's fund gets impacted differently, so.
Park impact fees goes away. That's just because you've already spent it. And there's.
Yeah, so those are restricted. Those are restricted funds. We used it,
You've already used it. Got you.
yeah, for this year. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
from the 22 to 23. Yeah, 23 is 0. So just.
I might be adding some of that
Okay.
back in. And this current one, that 250 is actually not going to get spent. That 250 was
So it
actually,
could be available for next year too.
but we still have, yeah, we have over 300 and
Okay.
that's not budgeted for currently.
Splash pad 140 down to 40.
That was a sprinkler system that we just
Oh, okay. That's
put
the
in,
park improvements. Got you.
and we don't
Okay.
need that expense next year.
You see any rate increases in any of the enterprise funds, Ty, other than maybe the one we just talked about,
Water.
water?
So I think just power and water are the only two rates that are you know, sewer's done what it's done and it's sustainable. Water's struggling, but every time we do a project, every time we unearth a pipe, it just falls apart. So it's not a very encouraging sign, but anyway, our water rates just need to be studied. They haven't been studied for a while, but we've had a hard time with the not knowing what the outcome of the North Morgan deal is and then future capital costs. So I think what we'll do is include the new tank and that in the impact fee study portion of that, so that the new growth is preparing us for a new tank up there.
Just one last question, Ty. Transfer to capital project, the transfers, is that money from, I know we've talked before about a savings account. Is that where that comes from? Right there.
That's just a projected. So at the end of the budget, when everything gets reconciled, if we still have that amount, that's, you know, that's fund balance. That's how much less we've spent than we brought in revenue. So up to that amount, and we'll push over to capital improvement projects
Oh, I see. Then you move it over there.
and put it into bridge money. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. Well, like you say, that may be different, but so tonight we adopt a date for the tentative budget, but that can change depending on what you do between now and the
So,
28th of June.
Yeah. So what you do is tonight you adopt the tentative budget, meaning you've reviewed it and you understand kind of what the plan is, but you set the date for the final budget.
Okay,
And
will we
then-
see the final
Yeah.
budget before?
Yeah, it'll be on in the end of June.
The final budget, but will we have a chance? Well, we'll just
Yeah.
look at it like we did this.
Yeah. And I hope to have a lot more information on the tentative budget. So I know it balances, but basically what I've done is I've gone through the new employees, their duties, shifted all the percentages to where they belong. I mean, it takes a lot of, just for those two line items. And I showed the mayor the spreadsheet that I work off of. It also includes the planner. You know, it increased that's the other thing is the mayor and council is all part of that administrative budget. It's all in that same line item. There's not a separate one for mayor and council, but that's all 100% in that line item. But I've done all that, plugged it in just so I have that portion done, and then I can go through all of the other operating costs, make sure that
Okay.
we're on track. But most of it was just, I had so many changes on the current year's budget. I spent a lot of time just doing the amended budget to show you how it pans out.
Ty, I've run out of red tabs.
Did I answer anything or just dance around them? Because I feel like I want to answer them, but maybe I could present it in a different format
Yeah,
that makes more sense.
This is, like I say, I'm not sure I completely understand it, so I need to do some more work on it too.
And we can, anybody's welcome to come
And you've been
meet
good
with
that
me
way,
too.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like we
Yeah,
can,
fair enough.
I could show you the salary spreadsheet and the benefits, but that's probably just more appropriate in my office than,
Right. Public.
because it's just the background work that turns into the line item, right? But if you're like, hey, what are we doing about this? I could talk line item by line item, kind of operationally what it means. Like, you know what I mean? Like who's doing what work and that sort of thing, but
Does
it's,
it make, I don't know, maybe Dave did this, I think maybe you're alluding to this a little bit. Does it make sense that we have an opportunity to sit down as a council to look at the final budget prior to the night we have to adopt the final budget?
sure, you could do a work session the week
I
before
think it's
or the meeting before, right?
not looking for another meeting, but it seems like in years past, we've done something like that, where we've sat down with the final budget in our hand and had an opportunity to go through it prior to the date certain to adopt the final budget. So
Well, you used to do the budget yourself, right? So
Yeah.
I'm sure you had more than one meeting to.
But I'm just tossing that out there. But it seems like, because I kind of get the feeling you're saying, do we get a chance to, talk about it and kind of kick it around before we have to actually approve it?
The next work meeting starts at noon.
About noon. But I don't know if
Well-
if it's something you want to do, I don't know.
And I don't know if I mentioned it, but the tentative budget also includes a 7% cost of living adjustment, across the whole board. Just knowing the situation with cost of living and trying to keep employees.
Or if you wanted to have a work meeting. You wanted to have a work meeting an hour or two earlier on that night of the final budget approval, I'm just saying.
Start at 5:30 like we did tonight.
Meet for lunch and
Yeah,
Anyway, just have a work session, the meeting before the final, and then if there's any major
I
change
think we could too. I just maybe,
or any major, like, hey, bring this back to us, or
That's a month from now. So if you do enough time, we need those extra couple of weeks.
hope you're okay. I
yeah, that'd be all right.
had some,
That'd be okay.
Since he retired, he likes to have meetings, doesn't he?
I'm not looking for another meeting. Didn't we used to do that though?
Yeah.
I think we used to do that.
Conversation, but I'm not seeing it. Did we get the COG money from the corridor preservation fund this year? Is it shown in the budget anywhere here?
it's in the amended budget, but it's actually, we're not gonna use it in the general fund.
Yeah, I
We're
know
gonna,
we did.
we're gonna put it in the capital improvements fund,
No, I'm not
and
looking for
it's
another
not
meeting.
reflected.
We need to retire. We can have more meetings.
So that will be changed.
Oh, Jeffrey, it's that.
No, we don't need to change the budget, we just won't spend
I
it,
think that Dave said.
Okay.
right?
You get a chance to
So,
talk about it before.
so in the parks, in this current amended budget, under parks, it has 250. On the revenue, it also shows 250. Because originally I was gonna buy that property with park impact fees. And then put the road on it and then make improvements along the river. But when we got the corridor preservation money approved at the last council meeting, that grant is restricted for road corridor. And so therefore I can't spend it out of parks. And so we're gonna, instead of bringing it in the general fund, we'll bring it in on capital improvements and just apply it towards the bridge project, if that makes sense. So even though it's in the amended budget, there's a revenue that we're not gonna use, and that park 250 we're not gonna use. So it'll just offset, it'll just be a,
Do you,
what's that?
That was under contribution. That's
Yeah.
where I
Yeah.
see it now.
you ever feel like a conductor of an orchestra?
Well, except for nobody's playing their stinking instruments. I'm just kidding.
You got your hands full.
It's,
A lot of moving parts.
there are a lot of moving parts, and I apologize because it's all, and Denise has been willing to help me, and the whole idea is that it's not just all here. Right? But quite literally, I peck around all the numbers with me. Every time someone says, hey, can we approve this invoice? I'm thinking of that line item. And what we're working on is a budget book. So it won't be this year, but next year, a budget book that will break all of this down into categories so that you can see, like, the roads, the revenue for roads and the expenses for roads, just in roads, right? The parks, so the parks has some impact fees and some other revenue, but kind of categorized in that context of parks and cemeteries. And the general fund's difficult because all you have is all of the different revenue sources. Some are restricted, some aren't, some are continual, some are one time, right? That get incorporated into the expenses, and it all comes to zero, but it doesn't give you a good idea of.
So you had a revenue item that was 100,000, but that was split up between 3 different entities. This book would reflect that.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably where I'm headed.
Yeah, and the other thing it'll do is year after year, once we have the budget book, it'll show the percent increase in by percentage in overall volume, right? Like, because the expenses and they won't match, right? Because it's general fund money. So everything's subsidized a little bit or a lot by tax revenue.
Right.
So
You're
it'll
saying this
show,
could-
it'll still just show you by how much,
okay.
like, you know, how much in park reservations or park revenue is generated by miscellaneous, you know, whatever, and then just how much of it is in expenses, but you'll be able to see it. This is a block of just expense categories, I think makes it very difficult to not see the associated revenue with what's funding which portion of it, if that makes sense. So,
With
All right.
that, Ty, you won't have to be here to answer questions.
well, good.
Just say refer to the budget book.
Yeah.
They
Print you off a
will
budget
call
book.
you.
Yeah.
Have your cell phone.
Yeah, it's, you know, we have a lot of stuff going on. We've got a lot of current projects, and that's another wild card is which projects get finished in this current budget year versus which ones float past that magic July. We're already off to a slow start on the sidewalk project and, you know, as for extent, so we're still doing the best we can, but it's keeping track of it. But yeah, 100 North was supposed to have started.
Oh, no, not 100 North again, right?
Exactly. No, it is that. It's the exact same scenario. We went and told everyone to move all their stuff off the street because we had a project starting, and then the contractor came back and said, I don't have supplies. I can't start. So for all my 4 pages, all you said was thanks. Like, I'm just kidding. Dave.
No, I read through it more than once.
Did any of it make sense? That was my intent there, was to give you an idea of what's caused the
Mhm.
changes, at least in the amended budget.
Yep.
It all makes sense.
No, that's good work.
Just a lot of moving parts, like you said.
Probably more than ever. I mean,
Yeah, normally we're a lot closer to the original budget
Right.
by the time you do an amended
yeah,
budget.
I think you had your hands full, so thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any more discussion on item B?
Mayor, I'm prepared to make a motion that we adjust the 2021-2022 fiscal year budget resolution 22-18.
We have a second.
I'll second that, Mayor.
Thought it was gonna die for a lack of second.
Close call.
Okay, Dave,
Aye.
Tony,
Aye.
Jeff, Jeffrey.
Aye.
Okay,
How's that moving along?
motion passes. Item C, tentative budget for 2022-23 fiscal year budgets and set date for final approval, resolution 2219.
What's the date for final approval again?
28.
28. Borrow your pen.
We already set June 28th for 5:30 for the MDA
MBA
and
and RDA.
RDA.
And then this, the final.
Tentative
approval
and
in the general session.
Of,
So you still have your 6 o'clock work session. You're talking about one. Discuss it. Or you want one on the 14th?
Like-
And the 28th.
Will the final budget be pretty much completed by the 14th?
Sure. Putting pressure on yourself?
I mean, I guess I'm saying if we met a little early that night, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I don't know how everybody else feels about it. But
Instead of a start at 5:30, start.
on the 14th or the 28th.
14th. Well, or I don't care.
Are you gonna need time on the 14th to discuss the conflict and also on the 20th? Because we'll still have the work session before the general session with time for the final vote.
I don't think you do.
Might be an hour.
That's a good point.
It's an hour. You got from 6 to 7 in the work session.
On the
28.
28, to talk about the final budget.
And focus just with that item.
That would be okay. I think.
So spend time on the 28th and not the 14th. Or you could do the,
I could, you know what,
Budget on the
I can just
14th.
send it out, right? Like we could send it out whenever it is that I finish it. I'll wait till the next morning and send it out.
And a pack of tabs.
No. Tabs are on your own.
Okay.
I'm sending an electronic version.
I've got some extra.
You know, and then in between that time and the final date, if y'all have a chance to review it and have questions, or you want to come, you know, schedule an appointment just to see what's different, what's changed, who's doing what, where.
To our work meeting on the 28th.
Dedicate it to the final budget.
Yeah, I think with the discussion with sending out in advance, I think my feeling would be if we started at 5:30, we could get through it all by 7. And if whatever we didn't, we'd spend another 30 minutes during the regular meeting.
We could all have our homework once Ty sends it out to us, right?
Yep.
Well, only if you're gonna make a bunch of changes on the last night. You gotta do your homework first.
Well, that might be hard. Doesn't it have to be adopted by the 30th?
Yeah,
So
yeah. That's what I'm saying is like, if you do have something that comes up, let me
we
know
don't have a lot
before
of
the.
wiggle room if we do
And,
changes.
you know, and then the other thing, just like this year's is an example on the final budget, it's our best guess, but my job is to keep us on budget all year, right? During the whole year.
Always amend it.
Yeah, and then if it's, you know, if we're in a recession and things are slow and short, then it means we've just pulled way back, but I don't see any problem with doing that. It's just, so what we do,
Just bets with the cookies. If it gets too tough.
or we just bring them ourselves, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Tony,
I'm prepared to make another motion. And that's we approve of the tentative budget for 2022-2023 fiscal year and set the date of June 28th for adoption of the final approval. Resolution 22-19.
And the public hearing.
And a public hearing. Okay. Thank you.
Second.
second. Any more discussion? Okay, Dave,
Aye.
Tony,
Aye.
Jeff, Jeffrey,
Aye.
okay, Denise passes. And we move on to city reports and business, and
No more meetings.
one less meeting than we thought we were. That's good. Project updates, Ty. Grant for trail, I'm gonna nail you all at once, and sidewalk project. Let's go to that point.
You want me to start on the? Want to start there, or,
Let's start on the basement
oh, you
remodel.
want to start right from the beginning? Okay. So basement remodel is going well. It's all framed in. Right after this meeting, if you would like to go see a tour, it gives you a little visual of what it will look like. And so we're before midnight. So if anybody would like after this meeting, I can go show you. Electrical's pretty much done. Plumbing's done. We're just waiting on the HVAC system before they'll sheet rock. During the process, we did work in enough. So there's enough cost savings that we're gonna be able to redo this entrance over here, the employee entrance. They're gonna take it out, re-pour it. And so I don't know if you all know, but this entrance back here is sagging. The door hasn't shut. They keep trimming the door. The windows are cockeyed because it had settling. Yeah, exactly. So we'll be able to do that. And then the other thing that's happened during this HVAC is there was planned to have a unit that we would just share from downstairs up here, and another one in the process. We had it all evaluated, and we're gonna try and make improvements to our whole system. So there's like 6 different HVAC units in this building and they're fighting each other all the time. Just, you know, when they're talking about where the returns are, where the registers are, and it's really frustrating. You know, it's like the bathrooms are cold, my office is way hot, and it doesn't make any sense because we almost have 1 heater for every 4 offices. So I don't know why it doesn't balance better than that. But anyway, we're getting a new unit downstairs that'll just run the whole basement because that's a whole different, you know, temperature. So that's that project, but that's coming along. The train depot, the asbestos has been removed. So that project took about a week and a half. And it's all been remediated. Now they're in there, they can go in there. They went in Friday to look at all of the woodwork
What
and
the cost of that was, that before they got started,
the,
was that kind of change order?
it was a change. It was about 40,000 a week and a half, but it was worth doing. We did have a cheaper option where they said we can do part of it and then you just don't touch here or there. And it's like, you know, but once you're here, please like clean it. That's kind of the approach we took. And
Is there anything gonna be done on the exterior of the train depot, tires and all interior?
mostly all interior. The roof tiles will be done. I think it'll get the plan. And so this is all budget priorities, right? So there's other budget priorities ahead of the outside, but if it goes far enough, it includes windows and a repaint. But the roof is a higher priority to replace the tiles. There's some missing leaky roof, missing tiles, downspouts.
They do in the stairway going up from the street up, it's kind of deteriorating way.
Yep, on both sides. One of them will have an ADA ramp, so the east side, depending on how anyway,
South side?
east,
We passed the budget to put that ADA in.
Who knows what direction?
yeah. So if you're looking at the depot on the right side, where their parking lot and ADA ramp will have a couple switchbacks right there. The upper level is all gonna have concrete. And then the other side will have a new set of stairs. I don't know if I mentioned that Geneva gave us a discount as a contribution to the project, and so. The other thing is inside, only one of the restrooms is gonna be ADA compliant instead of both of them. So that saved a lot of costs, and they just showed one of the doors will be wider. So that you have to have at least one, but then the other one's gonna stay more original. But not having to retrofit both of them is another cost savings. All the hardwood flooring is gonna be just sanded and refinished. So under all the carpet, you know, all of that's salvageable, so it's coming along. Commercial street realignment is underway. Right now, just doing mostly utility work. Of course, you know, we're buying the,
Where was all the water being pumped from the other day?
pump from or
I know
leaking.
they had a hose out there.
Yeah, we had water leaks, so we're doing ours and the valve didn't operate where they tie into our water line. So they gotta come clear back to Commercial Street. So tomorrow night, they're shutting off like at 8 o'clock at night. They have to shut off most of Commercial Street to make that new connection. And then at the end of Commercial Street, the county's also extending the water line. And they had a connection there where they're putting in a T. So our water line used to go clear into the fairgrounds. And what we're doing is we're saying, here's the water main. You know, here's your meter. And now you're responsible for everything for the meter into the fairgrounds. But we did have leaks. We had a valve that had to get replaced.
About a 3 or 4 inch blue pipe hose that was just,
Pumping out.
yeah. I was trying to get it. I was trying to get it over to my lawn, but I couldn't make it reach. So
Well, no, and part of it is like when we had a leak, they got the valve to close enough that it turned it into a really slow leak. And then I think they just pumped out what was leaking, but it stayed kind of positive pressure and didn't let any contaminants in. So they did that while they went, and got some parts to retrofit the valve. So it's a,
Fairgrounds will be metered with their usage instead of it all free. Better go on up to the restrooms by the pickleball court and all that.
so most of, yeah, just like every other project, every time we unbury a water line, it doesn't seem to want to hold together. So then we did get a grant. That 78,000 was a 50-50 match for the trail. So we're gonna, it's a two-year grant. So we'll finish Commercial Street, get the bridge finished, and then next year, and then bring the trail in, and we'll get a better trail design, kind of with a park space design after the bridge is done, to tie that all together. But I think I mentioned that the riverbank's gonna get widened, and then at the bottom, there'll be a shelf, like a 10-foot shelf for about 200 feet long. So you'll be able to walk under the bridge, kind of down by the water. At certain times of the year, it'll actually be underwater. But where that shelf is, it's that's what increased our impact to the floodway, is we increased the channel capacity, and then that little shelf will end up being kind of a little amenity, you know, where, so the trail can go past there and then you can walk down. There's only going to be about 6 feet of clearance though between the shelf and the top of the bridge. So it's like not necessarily a walkway, but it'll be nice.
Yeah, not a liability to us.
People can,
Over at the high school, they got a razor wire.
yeah. And the sewer lagoon, that project's underway. We got all the parts are delivered and they're out there working away.
The pipes did show up.
Yeah, there's a couple of not junctions or connections.
Yeah.
Anyway, fittings. Yeah. Those are still coming, but they have enough to get started with the pipe. The pipes were the big thing, and all the other equipment's there. So anyway, that's moving forward. The sidewalk project I already mentioned is delayed. I just mentioned secondary water. Most people saw that secondary water put out their own notification that said, you know, if you put in lawn, it's at your own risk, and estimated or recommended watering days. And they're kind of just, we're keeping our website updated. Stephanie's doing a really good job watching the state drought monitoring website, and we're just referring people to, so we're doing a lot of education and just staying on.
Getting a lot of inquiries.
Yeah, most of them just like, what are we doing about this? What are we doing about that? But we're just still like, you know, no restrictions other than just conserve, just same thing as we left off. Rates that, you know, when are the rates going to get lifted? And we said, we're just still in the same holding pattern until the drought improves, because we still have that elevated overage rate from last year.
Are people expecting that to go down?
They were hoping at the end of last year. Some people just ask, when's that overage rate going to come off? Because they're thinking the winter was going to fix all the problems, right?
Yeah.
But
They thought it was just temporary.
yeah, we do have questions about the splash pad, you know, and what we're going to do with that, because I think our strategy is just to monitor, see how it goes, and track usage. We do have a better ability to track the usage. It has a 15-minute shut-off timer. So every 15 minutes, someone has to.
And
So it'll automatically-
that'll have a mixed review, no matter
Yeah,
if you don't use it or if you do use it.
yeah.
How long into the season last year before you shut it off?
Well, it was pretty early on.
We saw a decrease in our spring flow pretty easy or early last year. And so and it was hot and dry, which, you know, after next weekend, maybe we'll all have a different town where it says it's going to 85, but so far we've been really fortunate.
Every Sunday, guys, just throw it up there.
What would it be like to run it just so many days a week?
So that's just something we have to evaluate. So either limit the days or hours in the day or certain days, but I don't know if that just pens up demand and then, we're only gonna run it for parties of 10 or more, or I don't know
Yeah,
what the right.
that will be a hard one.
That river's full of water, why aren't you running the splash pad?
River's full of water, go jump in it.
The King County, Georgia.
Reverse pump out there on that river.
I got this comment the other day again, just day before yesterday. I'll take water conservation seriously when I see the city quit issuing building permits. I don't know.
Oh, man,
That
should run in my ward Sunday.
gets tiresome.
Yeah.
I get it all. That was my next door neighbor, so nice guy, but yeah, that was his thoughts. When you quit issuing building permits, I'll get serious about water conservation.
Well, if we quit issuing
Okay.
building permits, we can also charge rates appropriate to the offsetting impact fees. The new growth is paying impact fees for the new capacities.
There's so many optics out there, you know what I mean? There just is.
Yeah. Okay.
While we're still over there at the park, in the splash pad, has that been mowed yet? We've got to make that park look better this summer than it has in the past couple of summers.
Yeah, we just got a new park employee, so we're gonna get after it. The other thing is the park, two of the remaining park employees went to training, so they're starting to go to turf training and stuff like that. So for a long time, we did not fertilize. It was just the city's way so that it didn't grow so fast, so we didn't have to mow it so much, and so it gets sparse and everything else. And what the other result was that we ended up using more water because we didn't feed the grass. So anyway, yes, I hope we'll stay on it and see what we can do. But yeah, same with the cemeteries, trying to.
Do we weed and feed it? Do we put
Yeah,
weed killer on it as well?
yeah.
I noticed this morning that end down that north end, I would call it. It's looking.
Well, and last
year.
year, because of we cut our water usage
Right.
clear down and let it go brown. It wasn't a good start this year, but we haven't been watering just because of we're waiting for the 15th,
Yeah.
just like everyone else, and it's been.
Yeah, it wouldn't be good to turn on that.
Yeah, so it's,
Our sprinkling system ought to help quite a bit.
oh yeah, that's what the other thing is. We're pretty optimistic about having that.
We'll have to water during the day.
Yeah. Just a couple of employee things. Chad Kramer passed his water operator 4 certification, and so that was the last one.
What are the levels?
4.
4 is the highest.
What, is that water? What about wastewater?
So that's Cal.
That's
and
certificates.
it's 4. And that's not level. So basically, it's the type of system that you have determines the certification that you go for. So so that's a kind of a misnomer. It's not like always 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like you got a level 4 system. You have to get level 4 certification. And sometimes it's like, well, you don't have treatment, but you have distribution. And so there is a little mix of both, right? But the idea is that for whatever system you have to have that same level of certification. And so if we had full mechanical, that requires the 4 versus 3. But we just try and get everybody certified to the highest level that we can. So then Roe Howard today, we're at the local government's trust, and he is certified as a designated safety officer. So it's a new program that the local governments trust just started. He's in the first, they called it the first batch. But it's like a 10-hour class. And then that's what the trust is hoping, is that every jurisdiction will have a designated safety officer to be able to look at our policies and procedures and the way that we do things. And so he got recognized today. That's why it wasn't on the agenda, but just want to compliment him. He's also the one that's training to be our building official. He has 3 of the 4 certifications on inspections passed so far. So his commitment was into May, to finish that so we can start. And he's been out doing inspections with the contract building inspector. And then he's also been helping out. He's taken on the role of code enforcement.
Who's DeRoe Howard?
Oh, that's his real, his no, he goes by Roe because, yeah, it's Darrow. So he just goes by Roe because everybody messes it up.
Was that how it's pronounced? Darrow? Darrow.
Then we have 2 new employees. One, his name is Dyson Blackburn. He works with the power department. It's not an additional employee, but we had another groundsman that left to do the apprentice, get into the apprentice program to become a journeyman. So when he left, we replaced him with another groundsman, and that's Dyson. But we did get a new parks employee, and she starts like the 18th. Yeah, Peyton Farnsworth, and she has some landscaping experience, and so we're pretty excited to have her on board. And now that she'll start in parks and cemeteries, then Trent will go help out the roads department, so we'll have a little bit of help there. Lance has been with the bridge and the sidewalk and the commercial street realignment, the new subdivision work going in, and the stormwater. There's just a lot of daily stuff that, with looking at signs and sidewalks and stuff, that he's going to really appreciate having some extra help.
Is he falling behind? Or is it?
He's doing a really good job of managing stuff. It's just the stuff it's just that we keep having him do the higher priorities first instead of
That's why is our city engineer doing some inspections on the jobs.
they do the inspections.
I thought I heard you say that Lance is doing that.
He's been helping, so he keeps track of like just subdivision work. So when we have a subdivision, all of them do reviews, and he helps. He looks at storm drain and stuff, but he also
But I know the roads is a big problem, big job, so I don't sure how he can do both.
yeah.
Point being.
Well, so he doesn't do the inspection, but because it's the engineer and they're remote, what our guys do is they kind of keep track of developments, and then they say, hey, this doesn't look right. Or, they're not up here on a daily basis, or they just dump their concrete where they're not supposed to on buildings or the.
Oh, you mean like contractors that are doing houses, stuff like that?
Yep. And basically that's just our guys keeping track of what's going on. But anyway,
I know where he's got a lot of work on the roads.
yeah, but he doesn't do the actual inspections, right? Like, is the concrete up for the pavement up to spec, or is it, measured correctly? He just they come up. So that's pretty much all I have. And I'll definitely take anyone on a tour downstairs after, unless you have other questions.
Is there any more comments?
When do we get boxcar barbecue?
I don't know, it's damn near 9 o'clock. Adjourn. That sound better?
Jeff wanted to go to midnight. Disappointed.